The snow was not falling gently that night. It came down in thick, heavy sheets, the kind that swallowed sound and turned the world into a silent white wall. Sarah pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. She had 3 miles left before she reached the edge of Ashford Pack territory, and her boots were already soaked through. She should not have been out here. Everyone knew that. The border forest between Ashford and the royal land was not a place for anyone after dark, least of all an Omega who had no rank worth speaking of, and no wolf powerful enough to defend herself if something in the trees decided she looked like a meal. But the healer in the next village had the medicine her mother needed, and the healer in her own village had run out 2 weeks ago and was not getting more until spring. So Sarah had walked. And now she was walking back, the small parcel of medicine tucked inside her coat against her ribs, where her body heat could keep it from freezing. The trees on either side of her were enormous, old things, their branches locked together overhead so that the snow came through in clumps rather than flakes. Her lantern made a small circle of orange light around her feet. Everything beyond that circle was dark and white and very, very quiet. She had been telling herself for the last half mile that she was not scared. She was almost convinced. Then she heard it. It was not a sound that fit the forest. It was too small, too fragile, too human, for a place that belonged to wolves and owls and whatever else moved through the dark between the trees. She stopped walking. She held her breath. She waited. It came again. A thin, high cry, the kind that started in the chest and came out desperate and broken. The cry of something that had been crying for a long time and was running out of energy, but could not stop, because stopping felt like giving up. A baby. Sarah turned toward the sound without making a decision to do so. Her feet simply moved. She left the path, which she knew was dangerous, and pushed through the snow between 2 wide trunks, her lantern swinging. The crying got louder. Then it got clearer. Then she nearly stepped on it. The bundle was tucked against the base of a tree, half buried under a drift that had built up while the wind pushed the snow against the bark. Whoever had left it there had wrapped it in a dark cloth, which was why she had almost missed it. But the cloth had shifted, or the baby had moved, and one small arm was sticking out, the tiny fist clenched, shaking. Sarah dropped to her knees. She did not stop to think about where a baby had come from, or who had left it, or why it was out here in the middle of a border forest in the middle of a blizzard, at a time of night when no one with any sense was walking. She reached for it. She pulled the cloth back and found a face so small it barely seemed real, red from cold and wet from crying, mouth open in that desperate, exhausted wail. She picked the baby up. The moment she did, the crying stopped. Not slowly. Not the way crying usually stops, winding down through hiccups and shuddering breaths. It stopped all at once, like a sound cut off at its source. The baby's eyes opened. They were the color of winter sky right before a storm, a gray so pale it was almost silver, and they found her face with a focus that no newborn should have had. Then the baby grabbed her wrist. The small fingers were cold, terribly cold, but they gripped with a strength that seemed impossible for something so small, and the moment they closed around her skin, Sarah felt something happen that she did not have a word for. It started as heat. Not pain, not burning, but a warmth so deep and sudden that it went all the way through her arm and into her chest. And for one breathless second, it felt like something enormous was pressing itself into the place just beneath her ribs, something heavy and permanent, the way a seal pressed into warm wax. Then it was gone. The baby was still holding her wrist. Sarah looked down at her skin. In the lantern light, she could see the faintest outline of something there, a shape on the inside of her wrist, curved and intricate, gone before she could make out what it was. She blinked. She looked again. There was nothing, just her skin, faintly warm. She stood up with the baby held against her chest. The wind had shifted, coming from the north now, cutting across the open space between the trees, and Sarah could feel how cold the air really was, the kind of cold that did not care about coats or determination, or how badly you needed to get home. The baby made a soft sound against her neck, not crying, something quieter and more settled, and she felt the small chest rise and fall. She needed to move. She needed to get off this path, out of this forest, back into territory where she knew the ground, and where there were walls and fires and people who could help. She tucked the baby more firmly inside her coat, pulling the fabric around both of them, and turned back toward the path she had left. She walked faster than she had before. The lantern swung harder. The shadows jumped. She told herself she was not scared. She was lying. The thing that scared her was not the dark, or the cold, or the distance. It was the quiet that the baby carried with it. Before she had picked it up, the forest had been its own kind of silent, that deep winter hush that sat between snowflakes. But now, with the baby against her chest, the silence felt different. It felt like the forest was paying attention, like the trees were watching. She had grown up hearing stories about the borderlands, about what lived in the space between pack territories, and what happened to people who wandered through it alone. Most of those stories were meant to keep children close to home, and she had known that even as a child. But knowing that a story is a warning does not always stop it from crawling up the back of your neck. She kept her eyes forward. She kept walking. The path came back into view 30 feet ahead, and she exhaled. She stepped back onto the flattened snow where she had walked an hour ago, her own footprints already half filled by the new fall. She turned toward Ashford. She put one foot in front of the other, and did not let herself slow down. She was almost at the edge of the forest, maybe a quarter mile from where the trees ended and the open land of the pack settlement began, when she noticed her wrist again. The warmth was still there, faint, like a coal that had cooled but not gone out. She shifted the baby to her other arm and pushed up her sleeve with her teeth, holding the lantern close. The light was bad, orange and trembling, but she could see it clearly now, in a way she had not been able to in the dark under the trees. A mark. Not a burn, not a bruise, not anything her skin had done on its own. It was a sigil, small and precise, drawn in lines so fine they looked like they had been placed there by someone with a very steady hand and a very thin instrument. It sat in the curve of her inner wrist, maybe 2 inches across, and it was the color of her skin, but slightly raised, the way old scars could be raised, catching the light differently. She stared at it for long enough that her arm got cold. Then the baby made a sound again, that soft, settled sound, and turned its face further into the warmth of her coat, and Sarah pulled her sleeve back down and kept walking. She reached the edge of the forest. The settlement was visible ahead, lanterns in windows, smoke coming from chimneys, the familiar shapes of buildings she had known her whole life. She moved toward the light. She was shaking. She told herself it was the cold. The gate at the edge of the settlement was not locked at this hour. There was a watch, 2 young pack members who rotated through the duty every few weeks, more as a formality than a real defense. Tonight it was Pip Cole, 19 years old and easily bored, who was sitting on a stool inside the small gatehouse, with a mug of something hot, and a book he probably was not reading. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. He looked at her face. He looked at the bundle inside her coat. Then his mug hit the ground. "Sarah?" His voice was very careful, in the way that voices got careful when a person was not sure if what they were seeing was real. "What is that?" "A baby," she said. "I found it in the forest." Pip stood up. He was a tall boy, all arms and uncertain angles, and he leaned over the half door of the gatehouse with his eyes wide. "In the forest? Out there? Tonight?" "Yes." He stared at the baby. The baby stared at nothing, its silver eyes open and very calm. Pip made a sound that was not quite a word, and grabbed his jacket from the hook on the wall. "I'll get Elder Marin," he said. "Good," Sarah said. "Do it quickly. The baby is cold." She walked past the gate and into the settlement, and the snow followed her in, and she did not look at her wrist again. She went to the healer's house first, because that was the place with the fire always burning, and the hands that knew what to do with something small and cold, and possibly not yet sure about whether it wanted to stay alive. The healer was a woman named Dot, 60 years old, and practical, in the specific way of people who had spent their whole lives dealing with things that went wrong without warning. Dot opened the door before Sarah could knock, which meant Pip had already sent word somehow, probably shouting across the settlement, with the specific lack of subtlety that was his defining trait. "Bring it in," Dot said. Sarah brought it in. The next 20 minutes were warm and full of purpose. Dot checked the baby's breathing, its color, the temperature of its skin, the steadiness of its heart. She called for 2 of her apprentices, young women named Cora and Nell, who arrived at different speeds, suggesting they had been doing different things, and one of them had been asleep. Sarah stood by the fire, and felt the cold leave her bones in slow stages. She watched Dot work. She watched the baby, who remained unnaturally calm throughout everything being done to it, which Dot noticed, and did not comment on in the way that healers sometimes did not comment on things that they had not yet decided how to file. "How old?" Sarah asked. "Few weeks," Dot said. "Maybe 6. Not a newborn. Someone's been feeding this baby. It's thin but not starving." She paused. "Someone took care of it. And then left it in the snow." "And then left it in the snow." They were both quiet for a moment. "There's something else," Sarah said. Dot looked at her. Sarah pushed up her sleeve. The mark was still there, no less clear now in the firelight than it had been in the forest, perhaps more so, because the warmth had made her skin flush, and the sigil stood against the color of it with a precision that made it look not like a mark on skin, but like something that had always been inside the skin, and was only now visible. Dot went very still. "When did that happen?" "When I picked the baby up, or when it grabbed me. I don't know exactly. Both things happened at the same time." Dot did not touch it. She looked at it for a long moment, and Sarah watched the expression on the older woman's face move through several stages, starting at careful and ending somewhere she could not quite name. "I need to send for Elder Marin," Dot said. "Pip was already going to get her." "I know." Dot straightened up. "I'm going to send my own message. A different one." She turned back to the baby, before Sarah could ask what the different message said. The fire crackled. The baby made its soft sound. Cora had wrapped it in warm cloth, and was holding it with both arms, rocking very slightly, in the way that people rocked babies, even when they had no particular reason to believe rocking helped. The baby did not seem to mind. Its silver eyes were open, and they kept finding Sarah wherever she moved in the room, tracking her with that same unnerving focus it had had from the first moment. She thought about the forest. She thought about the way the crying had stopped. She pulled her sleeve back down. Elder Marin arrived 40 minutes later, her gray hair loose from its usual careful arrangement, her coat thrown over whatever she had been wearing before she was summoned. She was a tall woman with a voice like a door closing firmly, and she ran Ashford Pack with the kind of quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. She came into the healer's house, looked at the baby, looked at Sarah, and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Show me." Sarah showed her the wrist. Elder Marin's face did something complicated. It happened fast, like a ripple moving across water, and then it was gone, and her expression was settled again. But Sarah had been watching, and she had seen it. "How many people know you were in the border forest tonight?" the elder asked. "Pip saw me come in. Dot, Cora, and Nell." "And the mark?" "Pip doesn't know. Dot saw it. I don't think Cora or Nell were close enough." The elder sat down. This was unusual enough that it made Sarah straighten. Marin did not sit unless the situation called for it, and the situations that called for it were few. "Sit down," Marin said. Sarah sat. "The mark on your wrist," the elder said, "is not something from our pack. It is not something from any ordinary pack. I have seen it once before, on a page in a very old book that we keep because we are required to keep it, and I have never expected to see it on a living person's skin." She paused. "It is a royal seal." The word dropped into the room and sat there. "A royal seal," Sarah repeated. "Yes." "On my wrist." "Yes." Sarah looked at her own arm, like it had done something without asking her permission, which, she supposed, it had. "Why would a royal seal appear on my wrist?" Marin looked at the baby. "I think," she said carefully, "that the more important question is who that baby belongs to." She stood up. She pulled her coat straight. She looked at Sarah with an expression that held several things at once. Concern, yes, but also something that looked like a careful kind of dread. The expression of someone who has just understood that an event they cannot control has already begun. "No one leaves the settlement tonight," Marin said. "Not you. Not the child. I will send word in the morning." "To who?" Sarah asked. Marin looked at her for a moment. "To the palace," she said. She left without explaining further. Sarah looked at the fire. The baby looked at Sarah. Cora continued rocking in her chair, pretending she had not heard any of it, which meant she had heard all of it. The snow pressed against the window. The mark on Sarah's wrist sat warm and permanent against her skin. Outside, the forest was dark and silent, and whatever had happened out there between the trees and the snow and the small cold hand that had grabbed her wrist was now set in motion, rolling forward like a stone pushed off the top of a hill, and she had no more power to stop it than the stone had. She pulled the baby from Cora's arms without asking. She sat down close to the fire. The baby curled against her like it had already decided she was where it was supposed to be. She did not sleep that night. Morning came gray and slow, the snow still falling but lighter now, the kind that drifted rather than drove. Sarah had not moved from the chair by the fire. The baby had slept against her chest in a way that suggested it had decided this arrangement was permanent, and she had let it sleep, because she did not know what else to do, and because the warmth of it was the only thing that felt simple in a night that had become very complicated. Dot came in at dawn with tea, and the expression of someone who had also not slept, though for different reasons. She handed Sarah the tea, looked at the mark on her wrist for the second time, said nothing, and went to check on the baby. The baby was fine. It had been fine since the moment Sarah had picked it up, which was itself a fact worth examining. Cora and Nell had traded off through the night. The one who had been asleep when Sarah arrived was now more awake and more interested in the situation than was probably helpful. Her name was Nell, and she was the kind of young woman who asked questions not to be rude, but because the alternative was thinking things privately, which she seemed to find unbearable. "Do you know what the seal means?" Nell asked, at what she probably thought was a subtle angle. "No," Sarah said. Elder Marin seemed to know. "Yes. And she said she was sending word to the palace." She did. Nell considered this. "The Alpha King hasn't left the palace in 2 years," she said. "Not publicly. Not that anyone's heard. Some people in the village think he's sick. Old Barner says he never existed, and the crown just passes documents around pretending. Old Barner also thinks the river runs uphill at night," Dot said from across the room, without turning around. Nell closed her mouth. Sarah drank her tea. The settlement woke up around them. She could hear it through the walls, the sounds of morning beginning, boots on packed snow, voices calling across the distance between houses, the smell of wood smoke, getting heavier as more fires were lit. Normal sounds. The sounds of a place that did not know that something had changed while it was sleeping. By mid-morning, Sarah knew that at least 6 people had heard about the baby, because 6 different people found reasons to walk past the healer's house slowly. 3 of them were bold enough to knock. Dot turned all 3 away, with the kind of calm firmness that did not invite argument. Elder Marin came back at midday. She did not knock. She opened the door with the key she kept for emergencies, which told Sarah immediately that whatever she had learned since last night had moved the situation from unusual to something harder to name. Behind Marin came a man Sarah did not recognize. He was roughly her own age, dark-haired, with a compact, careful way of moving that spoke of training and the habit of watching everything. He wore traveling clothes, well-made but plain, nothing that identified him. He looked at the baby first, then at Sarah, then at her wrist. His expression did not change, but something around his eyes did. "This is Colin Ward," Marin said. "He is from the palace." Colin Ward nodded at Sarah, not a bow, a nod, the kind that acknowledged someone without committing to anything. "I need to see the mark," he said. "You can see it from where you're standing," Sarah said. A pause. "I need to see it clearly." She pulled up her sleeve. She held out her arm. He crossed the room and looked at it from close, not touching, his eyes moving over the lines, with the focused attention of someone reading a language they knew, but were surprised to find here. He straightened up. He looked at Elder Marin. "Send word back," he said. "Tell them exactly what I told you to tell them, if the mark was real." Marin left immediately. Sarah looked at Colin Ward. "What did you tell her to tell them?" "That it's real," he said. He looked at the baby, who was awake now and looking back at him with those silver eyes. Something moved across his face. "I thought it would be something simpler, a mistake maybe. Someone's mark from another pack. I've seen things misidentified before. But this isn't misidentified." "No." He exhaled slowly. "No, it isn't." "What does it mean?" Sarah asked. He looked at her. He seemed to be deciding how much to say. "It means," he said carefully, "that someone is going to come here who does not leave the palace for ordinary things, and that when he gets here, this will stop being a quiet matter that stays inside Ashford." He did not say who that someone was. He did not need to. The settlement began to understand, by early afternoon, that something was happening that it did not have the context for. Word had spread from Pip to everyone Pip knew, which was most of the settlement, about the baby in the forest. Word had spread from Cora to the people she talked to about the mark on Sarah's wrist, and word had apparently spread from Elder Marin's message, through channels that moved faster than anyone had expected, because by mid-afternoon, the road into Ashford had 3 traveling parties on it, none of whom had been there the day before. 2 of those parties were ordinary, a trade group and a family returning from the neighboring settlement. The third was not. It moved too purposefully and too quietly, and the horses were too good for ordinary traveling. Sarah was standing at the window when she saw it. She did not know what she was looking for. She had been standing at the window off and on for the past hour, because sitting still had become unbearable, and the baby was asleep again, in the warm basket that Dot had arranged near the fire, and there was nothing for her to do but wait. The third party was 6 riders. 5 of them rode in a formation that she recognized, loosely and from the shape of it, as the kind that was meant to make one rider in the center easier to protect, without looking like that was what it was doing. The rider in the center wore a dark coat and rode with a stillness that had nothing to do with being relaxed. He was not old. That was the first thing she noticed, when the riders came close enough to see faces. She had expected older. The rumors that reached ordinary pack settlements about the Alpha King were mostly rumors about decisions, about laws and territories and the weight of authority. And those things accumulated a kind of age in the imagination, whether or not the person behind them had years to match. This man did not. He was perhaps 30, perhaps less. His face was composed in the specific way of someone who had long ago made the decision not to let much of what he thought show on the outside, and who had kept that decision until it became a habit so deep it looked natural. His hair was dark. He sat on his horse with the economy of movement of someone who had been riding since before he could remember. He looked at the healer's house, as the riders slowed. Just looked at it. Sarah stepped back from the window. Colin Ward, who was still in the room, and had apparently known what was coming, but had not found it necessary to say so, straightened up from the wall he had been leaning against. "Don't go anywhere," he said, to Sarah and to Dot both. He went outside. Dot picked up a cloth and began doing something with it at the table, the gesture of a person who needed their hands occupied. She did not look at Sarah. "I've been a healer for 38 years, she said, conversationally, "and I have never had the Alpha King in my house." "He's not in your house yet," Sarah said. "He's going to be." The door opened. He came in without announcement, which was not what she had expected. She had expected something formal, some introduction, some arrangement of space and attention that put him at the center of it. Instead, he simply came through the door and into the room, Colin Ward behind him, and 2 of his riders flanking the entrance, and he stopped in the middle of the space and looked at the basket by the fire. For several seconds he looked at nothing else. His face did not show much, but the quality of his stillness changed. It went from the trained kind to something underneath that, and she caught it only because she had been watching him since he came through the door, and she was good at seeing small things. She had spent her whole life in situations where the small things were the only honest ones. He turned from the basket. He looked at her. His eyes were darker than she had expected, not cruel, not warm, present, in a very complete way, the way of someone who, when they looked at you, was actually looking at you rather than at the space you occupied. He looked at her wrist. She had not pulled her sleeve down. She had been standing with her arm at her side, sleeve pushed up, the mark visible. It had seemed pointless to hide it. He was here because of it. He looked at it for a long moment, then he looked at her face. "Your name," he said. "Sarah Cole." Cole. He seemed to be placing something. Ashford Pack. Omega rank. Yes. He nodded. Once. Very slowly, as though confirming something to himself rather than to the room. "Where did you find it?" She told him. The border forest, the path, the sound, the snow. She told him exactly where she had been, and which direction she had been walking, and how the baby had been positioned, and what had happened when she picked it up. She kept it simple, and she kept it in order, because that was how she always told things when she was scared. And she was scared, though she intended to be the only person in the room who was entirely sure of that. He listened without interrupting. That was the second thing she noticed. Some men listened to information the way they waited for their turn to speak, tracking only the parts that were relevant to what they already thought. He did not do that. He listened the way someone listened when they were building something in their mind, when each piece mattered, for where the next piece had to go. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then he crossed to the basket. He looked at the baby for a long time. The baby was awake now, those silver eyes open, and it looked back at him with the same focused attention it turned on Sarah. But it did not reach for him, it did not cry. It simply looked. "The child is alive," he said, not to anyone in particular. "Yes," Dot said, from her place at the table. "Healthy? Thin? Cold when she brought it in? Stable now?" He nodded. He did not reach for the baby. He stepped back from the basket. He looked at Sarah again. "The mark on your wrist," he said. "Tell me exactly what you felt when it appeared." She told him that too. The heat, the depth of it, the feeling of something pressing in. He listened in the same way, building. When she finished, he looked at Colin Ward. Ward gave a very small nod. The Alpha King looked back at Sarah. His expression was still controlled, still composed, but there was something just behind his eyes now, something she could not identify clearly, but which she recognized by texture. It was the expression of someone standing at the edge of a problem they did not yet have a solution for, looking at the only available variable. "You're coming with me," he said. It was not a question. "Coming with you," Sarah repeated. "To the palace." The room was quiet. Dot's cloth had stopped moving. "I don't know anything about the palace," Sarah said. "That's not relevant. I have a family here. My mother needs. That will be arranged." His voice was not unkind. It was simply final. The voice of someone who had been making decisions about complicated situations for long enough that the decision and the delivery had become the same gesture. "Your mother will be cared for. Your obligations here will be met. But you are coming to the palace, and so is the child, because separating them is not an option." As if to underline this statement, the baby chose that precise moment to make a sound. Not crying. Not its soft, settled sound either. Something between the two, a thin, questioning note that seemed to be directed toward the door, toward where Sarah had been standing. She had moved 3 steps to her left when he had said, "You're coming with me," and the baby had tracked her. Everyone in the room noticed it. "You have until morning to prepare," the Alpha King said. "Colin will stay and answer what questions he can. I have to send more messages before dark." He looked at her one more time, and she held it, because looking away felt like losing something. "What you did last night in that forest was not a small thing, Sarah Cole. The world you were living in before you heard that child cry no longer exists. I'm sorry for that." He said it plainly, without performance, and that plainness was what made her believe him. He left. The door closed. Dot set the cloth down on the table and sat down in a chair. Nell, who had reappeared at some point in the last 20 minutes, and had apparently been behind a curtain the entire time, came out from behind the curtain. Sarah looked at her wrist. The mark sat quiet and warm. She thought about her mother's house, about the small room she had grown up in, and the particular sound the door made when the wind came from the east, about the way her rank had always been the first thing in the room with her. Omega, lower, lesser, always spoken first, so that everything else could be arranged around it. She looked at the baby in the basket. The baby looked back. Sarah walked over, picked it up, and held it. The settling sound, against her neck, the small weight. "I need paper," she said. "I have to write to my mother before morning." Colin Ward produced paper from somewhere in his coat, with the efficiency of someone who had anticipated this. She sat back down by the fire and began to write. Outside, the snow had finally stopped. She wrote carefully, and she wrote honestly, because her mother had always known when she was not being honest, and that capacity had not diminished with age or illness. She wrote that she was fine. She wrote that something had happened that she could not fully explain in a letter, but that she was not in any danger. She wrote that Marin would see that the medicine she had carried home was delivered, and that the woman who brought it would also bring money for the next 3 months, from a source Sarah would explain later. She did not write, "I'm being taken to the palace." She wrote, "I have to go somewhere for a while." She did not write, "I found a baby, and now it won't let me go." She wrote, "I have been asked to help with something important." She folded the letter. She looked at the baby. The baby's hand was curled around the edge of the cloth, and in the firelight, the small fingers looked almost translucent, so fine-boned and new that the light seemed to pass through them slightly. She thought about what the king had said. The world you were living in before you heard that child cry no longer exists. She did not know yet if that was a terrible thing or not. She supposed she would find out. She handed the letter to Colin Ward and went to find her coat. The palace was 2 days' ride from Ashford, and those 2 days were unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her 30 years of living. She had ridden horses before, the pack-owned animals used for hauling and the occasional long errand, but she had never ridden the way the king's riders rode, which was with the purposeful, ground-eating speed of people who knew exactly where they were going and had decided that getting there quickly mattered more than being comfortable. They gave her a horse. It was better than any horse she had ridden in her life, and it tolerated her inexpert handling with a patience that suggested it had been chosen partly for this quality. She held the baby against her chest with one arm and the reins with the other, and tried not to look at the ground passing below her. Colin Ward rode beside her most of the way. He was not talkative, but he was present in a way that felt deliberate, close enough to intervene if her horse did something unexpected, or if she had questions. She had questions, but she organized them carefully before asking them, because she had learned early that the quality of an answer depended heavily on how precisely you asked the thing. On the afternoon of the first day, she asked about the mark. What is it, exactly? Not what it does. What is it? Colin looked ahead for a moment. It's a protection seal, one of the old ones, from before the current royal line, before the current order of packs. How old? 300 years, at least, possibly more. The records aren't consistent, and most of the people who could have confirmed them are not alive. And it appears when someone picks up a royal child? Not any royal child, he said. Not any pickup. The seal responds to something specific. The way it was described to me, it responds to an act of protection that comes from instinct rather than calculation. He paused. Someone who runs into danger for a stranger's child in the middle of a blizzard, alone, at night, with no expectation of reward. That kind of instinct. Sarah considered this, so it's a test. It's not designed as a test. It doesn't choose people the way a test chooses. It recognizes something. And it recognized me. Yes. She looked at her wrist where the mark rested under her sleeve. What does that mean, practically? What changes because of it? Colin was quiet for a moment. She got the sense that he was choosing how much to say, in the same way she had been choosing how much to ask. It means, he said finally, that in the eyes of the old law, you have a bond with that child, not a family bond, something older than family, something that the palace courts are bound to recognize regardless of your rank or origin. The palace courts. Yes. The people who would normally care a great deal about someone being an Omega from a small settlement being brought into the royal household. Those people, yes. She let that sit for a while. The baby was asleep, its breathing slow and steady against her coat, its small face pressed into the warmth of her neck. The horses moved. The land changed around them, the open territory between settlements giving way to denser forest, then to a long stretch of flat land, where the sky felt enormous, then to low hills that got larger as they went north. On the second afternoon, with the hills rising around them and the road getting better, more deliberate, more maintained, she asked about the king. His name, she said. What do I call him? Calian, Colin said. In formal settings, Alpha King, or Your Majesty. In direct conversation, he's used to both, but he prefers people to use his name once they've been introduced. How long has he been king? 7 years. Since he was, what, 23? 22. Sarah tried to imagine being 22 and becoming responsible for every pack in the territory. The pack she had grown up in had 40 families, and she was aware that Elder Marin found it exhausting. His parents? His father died. His mother lives at the palace but stepped back from governance when Calian took the throne. She prefers it that way. And the baby's mother? A silence, longer than the others. That's something for Calian to speak to if he chooses, Colin said. Sarah noted the closed door and did not push it. The palace appeared on the afternoon of the second day, as the road crested a long hill, and the land opened below them into a wide valley that had clearly been chosen for exactly this purpose, a natural bowl that made the structure at its center look both protected and permanent. The palace itself was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something sharp and imposing, all towers and walls, the kind of architecture that was meant to communicate power by making everything around it look small. This was not that. It was large, certainly, and it was old in the way that things were old when they had been repaired and added to and slowly grown over centuries, rather than built all at once. The stone was dark, nearly black in the afternoon light, but there were trees inside the outer walls, bare-branched in winter, but clearly substantial, and the proportions of the gates were designed to let in light rather than keep it out. It looked, from the hill, more like a very large house that had never stopped adding rooms than like a fortress. She did not let herself be comforted by this. Beautiful things had kept just as many terrible secrets as ugly ones in every story she had ever heard. They rode through the outer gates. The guards there recognized Colin and the king's riders and stepped aside without ceremony. She noticed the guards looking at her, at the bundle in her arms, with careful faces that showed nothing, which meant they were trained well, or there had already been word sent ahead, or both. She noticed other things as they moved through the outer yard, the number of people. The palace was not dormant, not the quiet preserved place of someone who kept court for ceremony. It was working. People moved between buildings with the purposeful speed of a place that had things to do. There were stables, workshops, what looked like a large kitchen complex, a long building she could not identify, smaller attached structures. It smelled of horses and food and wood smoke and, underneath all of that, the particular scent of a large wolf pack, many wolves in close proximity, a collective warmth that she recognized from her own settlement but that was here, on an entirely different scale. She was an Omega. She felt that fact with new clarity as they moved through the yard and people stopped to look. She had always known her rank. It was not something you forgot when you had been placed at the bottom of a hierarchy since you were old enough to understand hierarchy. But knowing it in a place where everyone knew everyone, and the relationships were established, was different from knowing it here, in a place where every person who looked at her could tell within seconds what she was, and what that meant, and where she stood. She sat straighter in the saddle. Not because the spine would help, because it was the only thing she could make the choice to do. Colin brought them to a stop at a set of inner doors. There was a woman waiting there, somewhere around 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the calm, organized expression of someone who managed things for a living. She looked at Sarah, then at the baby, then at Sarah's wrist. "I'm Helene Voss," the woman said. "I manage the household staff. I've been briefed on your arrival." She said this in the way of someone who had been briefed on things that surprised her, and had decided to process the surprise privately, and on her own time. "I'll take you to your rooms. The baby will have what it needs. You'll be given time to rest before you're called." "Called for what?" Sarah asked. "The king will want to speak with you. Likely this evening." Sarah climbed down from the horse. Her legs were not enthusiastic about this after 2 days of riding, but they held. She shifted the baby, and followed Helene Voss through the inner doors. The inside of the palace was warmer than the outside, and better lit than she had expected. Not lavish, not the kind of deliberate display that said, "Look at what we have," more the kind of warmth and light that came from a place where people actually lived, and where whoever made decisions about such things had decided that comfort was a reasonable thing to provide. The floors were stone with rugs at intervals. The ceilings were high. The walls had things on them, mostly woven pieces and maps, a few portraits, nothing that felt like it was there purely to impress. She catalogued exits as she walked, not because she expected to need them, because it was what she did in unfamiliar spaces, had done since she was a child, and the habit was too old to stop now. Her rooms were on the 3rd level, reached by a staircase that turned twice. The rooms were 2 of them, a sleeping room and a small sitting room with a fireplace, both already warm. There was a wooden crib set up near the fireplace in the sleeping room, new-looking, like it had been arranged quickly and recently. A chair beside it with cushions, fresh water and food on a low table, clothing, plain but well-made, arranged over a chest at the foot of the bed. Helene Voss showed her where things were, with the efficiency of someone doing this for the 5th time today. She had questions. Sarah could see the questions on her, but she did not ask them, which was professional, and also meant that she was very well trained. "Someone will come for you in 2 hours," Helene said at the door. "Is there anything you need before then?" "Information," Sarah said. Helene paused. "I don't know anything about how this palace works," Sarah said. "I don't know the layout, the people, what I'm supposed to do, how I'm supposed to behave. I don't know who knows I'm here, who doesn't, who is unhappy about it, and who I should avoid until I understand enough to know what I'm doing. That's what I need." Helene Voss looked at her for a moment. "You're more practical than I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Honestly? More afraid." "I'm afraid," Sarah said. "I'm just not confused as well. Fear I can manage. Confusion is harder." Something in Helene's face shifted slightly. A careful reassessment. "I'll send someone who can give you the layout and the basic protocols. I can tell you myself that the people most likely to be uncomfortable about your presence are on the council. Specifically, Lord Edric Hale and his group. They will not approach you directly, but they will make sure you know they are watching." "Understood." The people who are not bothered are mostly the household staff and the king's personal circle, which is small. Colin Ward you've met. There's also a woman named Petra who handles the king's correspondence, and a man named Fen, who has been with the king since childhood. Both are trustworthy. Is the king trustworthy? It came out before she had decided to ask it, which was unusual. She was normally better at deciding first. Helene looked at her steadily. "He is honest," she said. "That's not always the same thing, but for an Omega who has arrived in this palace carrying his ward and his seal, honest is what you want most." She left. Sarah put the baby in the crib, where it looked at the ceiling with the same focused, untroubled attention it turned on everything, and sat down in the chair beside it. She put her arm on the armrest so she could see her wrist. The mark looked back at her. 2 hours. She had 2 hours to become someone who could walk into a room with the Alpha King and not look like what she was, a woman from a small settlement, with no rank and no precedent and no framework for any of this. She started with what she knew. She knew the baby was real, and that she had found it, and that whatever the mark meant, she had not asked for it, and so she did not owe anyone an apology for having it. She knew that fear was a response to unfamiliar circumstances, and that unfamiliar circumstances could be made familiar through attention and time. She knew that Helene Voss had told her something useful without being asked to, which meant that either she was kind or she had been instructed to, and either outcome was more useful than the alternative. She knew that Kalian, Alpha King, had looked at her wrist and looked away, and that the looking away had cost him something. She intended to understand what. When the knock came exactly 2 hours later, she was ready. The baby was asleep. She was standing. She followed the palace guard down the corridor and did not look at the walls. She was not confused. The room she was taken to was not the throne room. She had expected the throne room, had been mentally preparing for the scale and formality of it, the rows of watching faces, the elevated position, the architecture designed to make the person at its center seem inevitable and unreachable. Instead, the guard brought her to a smaller room, a study or a working room, with a large table covered in papers and maps, shelves along 2 walls, and a fire that was doing serious work against the cold. Kalian was standing at the table when she came in. He was reading something. He did not look up immediately. The guard closed the door. The room was quiet except for the fire. He finished reading whatever he was reading, set it aside, and looked up. He looked the same as he had in the healer's house, which she had not quite expected. She had expected the palace version of him to be different, amplified somehow, more formal, the way people sometimes became more of whatever they were when they were surrounded by the things that confirmed it. He was simply himself, dark coat, composed face, eyes that were present in the full way she had noticed before. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat. He remained standing, which should have felt like a power arrangement, and instead felt like a person who had been sitting all day and preferred not to do it again. "How are the rooms?" he asked. "Good," she said. "More than good." "And the child?" "Asleep. Someone brought extra blankets. The crib is well made." He nodded. He crossed to the other side of the table and looked at the fire for a moment, his hands behind his back, and she could see by the way he was standing that he was organizing something, working out an order for what he was about to say. "I owe you information," he said. "You came here because I told you to. and you've been given almost none of the context that would make this situation comprehensible. I want to correct that. All right, she said. The child's name is Eli, he said. He's 8 weeks old. His mother was a woman named Lyra, who came from the northern settlements, very far north, a place called the Coldwater Pack. She and I were not bonded. She was not my queen. What happened between us was brief, and not something either of us planned, and I did not know about the child until after Lyra died. The room absorbed this. How did she die? Sarah asked. She was killed, he said. It was a flat word, delivered flatly, not because he was without feeling about it, but because, she sensed, the flatness was a way of holding the feeling still long enough to speak around it. By people who had already decided that any child of mine who was not of their choosing was a problem. She managed to get the baby out before they found her. She sent it with a woman she trusted, south, toward the border. The woman, I believe, was also found. She left Eli in the forest rather than lead anyone to where she was taking him. To keep him hidden, Sarah said. To keep him alive, he said. Yes. Silence. The fire shifted. Who killed her? Sarah asked. He looked at her steadily. That's a question I'm still working to answer definitively. I have strong suspicions. I don't have proof. A pause. 3 noble houses have reasons to want my line complicated. 2 of them would prefer an heir of their own choosing, through a daughter they'd offer in a formal bond. The 3rd simply prefers the instability of a king without an heir, because instability, for certain people in certain positions, is commercially useful. And Eli is your heir. He's my son, Kalian said simply. The question of what that means politically is secondary to that fact. Sarah looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. What do you need from me? He looked at her wrist. The seal, he said. You know what it means, at least roughly. Colin explained the basics. He said I have a bond with the child, that the courts are bound to recognize it. The seal means that in the eyes of the oldest law, you are Eli's designated guardian, not a servant, not a nursemaid, not a hired caregiver, a guardian. The distinction is legally significant. It means that your well-being is tied to his, that decisions about his care require your involvement, that anyone who wants to harm him must, in effect, go through you first. And I happen to be an Omega from a small settlement. You happen to be exactly who you are, he said. The seal is not random. It does not make mistakes. She absorbed this. So I'm here, as a legal fact, she said. You're here, because my son will not stop crying when you're not near him, he said. And there was something in his voice when he said it. A stripped-down practicality that was somehow more honest than anything formal would have been. The legal fact is what makes it possible for you to be here without creating a political crisis worse than the one I already have. But the reason, the actual reason, is that Eli needs you, and I am not willing to put anything above that. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, What do you need from me beyond being near him? For now, nothing. Be in the palace. Be safe. Let me deal with the people who are going to find your presence inconvenient. Do not go anywhere alone until I tell you it's safe to do so. Is it not safe now? It wasn't safe for Lyra, he said. The name dropped into the room with weight. I understand, Sarah said. He nodded. He looked back at the fire. You can ask me anything you want. I will not always be able to answer, but I won't lie to you. He said it matter-of-factly, the way someone stated a thing they had decided a long time ago. I dislike lying. It requires remembering too many versions of the same event. Despite everything, she almost smiled. That's a practical objection. I'm a practical person. Your household manager said you were honest. Helene is often accurate. He looked back at her. You have another question. I can see it. She did. She had been holding it since the healer's house. When you looked at my wrist, she said, and then looked away. In Dot's house. Why did you look away? A pause. Because I wasn't expecting it to be real, he said. I came to Ashford expecting a misidentification. Something explainable. Another pause, smaller. When it wasn't, I needed a moment that I would have preferred not to need in front of people. Looking away was the fastest way to take it. He said it honestly, with no particular decoration, and she believed him. She stood up. Thank you for telling me about Eli, she said, and his mother. Thank you for bringing him home, he said. She left. In the corridor, walking back toward the staircase, she thought about Lyra, who had been killed by people who preferred things arranged differently, and about Eli, 8 weeks old and silver-eyed and completely calm in the arms of a woman he had never met, as though he had known she was coming. She thought about the mark on her wrist. She had not asked for it. She realized slowly, and with a precision that felt like stepping onto solid ground after uncertain ice, not sorry to have it. The palace had a rhythm, and she learned it in 3 days. She learned it the way she had always learned unfamiliar places, by watching the edges rather than the center, by noticing where the foot traffic was heavy in the morning and light in the evening, by paying attention to which staff members greeted her and which ones found reasons to be looking somewhere else when she passed. She learned where the kitchens were, where the laundry came and went, where the guards changed, where the corridors narrowed, and where they opened out. She learned which staircase was faster to the eastern wing and which one was watched. She learned that Eli always cried between the 2nd and 3rd hour of the morning, a short window of inconsolable unhappiness that no one but her could reliably bring to an end. She learned this because she was there for it. She had made the decision, after the first night, to trust the palace less than she trusted her own attention, and so she had arranged the crib in her sleeping room and had kept Eli within reach during the nights, rather than letting the staff take him to the nursery that had been prepared. Helene had raised an eyebrow at this but had not objected. On the 3rd morning, Kalian appeared at her door. Not announced, not formal. He simply knocked, and when she opened the door he was standing in the corridor with what appeared to be 2 cups of tea, which he was holding slightly awkwardly, like someone who had decided to carry them himself, rather than have someone else do it, and was now slightly uncertain about the decision. "I heard the 3rd hour crying," he said. "I was working late, I thought." He stopped. He held out one of the cups. She took it. "He's asleep again," she said. She stepped back from the door to let him see into the room. Eli was in the crib, both arms extended outward, mouth slightly open, the boneless sleep of a small person who had exhausted himself and then recovered completely. Kalian looked at his son for a moment. He said nothing. She was learning that he sometimes communicated through what he did not say, and that the silences had different qualities, if you knew how to read them. This one was soft, difficult around the edges. "He looks like her," he said, quietly. She did not ask who. She already knew. "Does that—" She stopped. He looked at her. "Does it what? Does it make it harder?" she said. "To look at him?" "Yes," he said, simply, without dressing it up or explaining it or apologizing for it. She respected that. They stood in the doorway and drank their tea, and the fire crackled in the room behind her, and Eli slept, and the palace was quiet around them, in the way that large places were quiet very late, like a held breath. After a while he said, "I've been looking into who sent your letter to your mother from Ashford. The money you needed sent. Colin arranged it," she said. "I'm aware. I'm expanding it. Your mother is being moved into the settlement healers' quarters, which are warmer, and have better access to care. The debt your family had with the grain merchant is settled. There's a stipend being arranged going forward." She had not asked for any of this. She looked at him. "You didn't leave anything behind by coming here," he said. "I don't want you to think of it that way." "Why not?" she said. "Not to be difficult. A genuine question." He looked at her steadily. "Because people who feel they've lost something are always partly absent from where they are. I need you fully present here. That's practical." "It is," he agreed. She drank her tea. "It's also kind," she said. He did not respond to that, which she was starting to understand meant he did not disagree with it, but did not know how to take it easily, which was its own kind of interesting. "You should sleep," he said, looking at the circles under her eyes with a directness that was not unkind. "So should you," she said. "I can see your study light from my window until after midnight." He looked at her, a brief, sharp look, slightly surprised, like someone who was not used to having their own habits reflected back at them. "I'll sleep when I've finished." "And how often does that happen?" A pause. Less than it should. He left with his own cup, and she closed the door and leaned against it for a moment in the dark. She had not expected to be comfortable around him this quickly. She had expected the rank, the distance, the formal weight of what he was. He was that. She knew he was that. She had seen it in the way every person in the palace arranged themselves slightly when he was present, the automatic reorganization of body language that spoke of hierarchy so deeply embedded it was below conscious thought. But in the corridor with the tea and the sleeping baby between them, he had not been that version of himself. He had been something quieter and more provisional, something that she suspected very few people in this palace saw. She did not let herself make more of that than it was. She went back to bed. The council met on the 5th day after her arrival, and Colin came to tell her about it beforehand, which she appreciated and also found slightly ominous. Lord Edric Hale has called a formal inquiry, Colin said, into the nature of your seal and your legal status here. An inquiry, Sarah said. It's within his rights as a council member to request one, Colin said. He framed it as procedural, ensuring the correct legal recognition of the seal, making sure everything is done properly. He said this with the specific, careful tone of someone describing a thing that was not as it was being described. But it's not procedural, she said. It's an opportunity to put your presence under formal scrutiny in front of the whole council, Colin said. To ask questions that, depending on how they're phrased, could undermine the legal status of the seal, regardless of its authenticity. How? By questioning whether an Omega from a borderline settlement, with no documented lineage and no pack standing, can legitimately bear a royal protection seal. The seal's history does not specify that it can only bond to wolves of a certain rank, but Hale's position would be that centuries of precedent have established expectations, and that expectations have the force of convention, and that convention is close enough to law to matter. Sarah looked at her wrist. And what does Kalian say? He says he'll attend the inquiry himself. She nodded. When? Tomorrow morning. She spent the evening in her rooms, preparing the way she had always prepared for things that required her to walk into a room and be correct. She organized what she knew, identified what she did not, decided what was important and what was decoration, and then went to sleep early so that she would be sharp. The inquiry was held in the council room, which was off the main hall on the ground level, a wide, formal space with a table long enough to seat 20 people. There were 14 on the council. 12 of them were present. 2 seats were empty. She came in with Colin. Kalian was already there, seated at the head of the table, not at the center, where a more theatrical version of power might have sat, but at the head, the practical working position. He looked at her when she entered, and gave the smallest nod, which she read as, "You are steady, and I am paying attention." Lord Edric Hale was in the seat to the left, 2 chairs down. She had been told to look for him, and she found him immediately. A heavy-set man in his late 50s, with the particular kind of self-assurance that came from never having been seriously contradicted. He looked at her the way certain men looked at things that had appeared in places those things did not belong, with an offense that was more structural than personal. She sat in the chair that had been placed at the side of the table, the position of someone presenting rather than voting. She put her hands on the table. The mark was visible. Hale opened the inquiry by establishing the premise, which, as Colin had predicted, was framed as procedural care for the integrity of the royal seal. He used words like tradition and precedent and appropriate recognition, and he used them with the comfortable ease of someone who had used them many times. Then he looked at Sarah. "We need to establish," he said, "whether the mark you bear is indeed the royal protection seal, or whether it may be a similar appearing mark of different origin." The palace scholar confirmed it, Colin said, from his seat. "With respect, the palace scholar is not the council," Hale said smoothly. "We require the council to be satisfied." Sarah looked at Hale. She kept her voice steady, which was not difficult because she was not, at the moment, angry. She was simply clear. What would satisfy the council? A brief pause. He had expected her to defer to Colin or to Kalian. She had not done that. "A formal examination of the mark," Hale said, "by council-appointed experts." "When?" "Today, if possible." "All right," she said. Another pause. Smaller. Kalian had not said a word. She could feel him watching. The examination took an hour. The council-appointed experts were 2 people, an older woman named Agnes, who was the council's legal historian, and a man named Soren, who specialized in ancient wolf lore. They examined her wrist with glass instruments and written references and quiet, technical conversation between themselves that she did not try to follow because it was not meant for her. She held her arm still. She waited. Agnes straightened up. "It is the seal," she said, to the room. She said it with the authority of a person who did not say things she was not sure of, and the weight of it settled over the table like something physical. Hale's face did not move, but the set of his shoulders changed. "The seal being authentic," Kalian said, speaking for the first time in the inquiry. "The legal standing it confers is clear. The Council's role today is to recognize that standing and record it formally, not to contest it." He looked at Hale. Not hostile, simply clear. "That is the limit of this inquiry. We are here to recognize a fact. We are not here to decide whether we like it." Hale looked at Sarah. She looked back. She did not look away. He said, formally and with the specific flatness of a man accepting something he cannot change, "The Council recognizes the seal and the standing of Sarah Cole as guardian of Eli, ward of the royal house." She exhaled through her nose. Kalian looked at her once as the room began to move and shift around the end of the inquiry. Just once. And she read that look in the same way she had been reading his looks for 5 days. The small, honest signals in the controlled face. That one said, "Well done." She stood up. She walked out of the council room with her back straight, and her hands at her sides, and her mark visible on her wrist. Behind her, she heard Hale say something quietly to the man beside him. She did not hear the words. She did not need to. She was not done with Edric Hale, and she knew it, and she was fairly certain he knew it too. But today was not lost. Today the seal was real. That was enough to build from. She went back to her rooms and found Eli awake and being entertained by a young woman from the household staff named Bryn, who had the naturally cheerful quality of someone who was good with babies, and knew it, and was happy to use the ability whenever possible. Eli was not crying. He was looking at Bryn's moving hands with the focused attention he gave to everything, but when the door opened and Sarah came in, his eyes found her immediately and his whole small body shifted. Bryn noticed this and said nothing, which was kind. Sarah sat in the chair by the fire and took Eli when Bryn offered him. He settled against her the way he always did, the weight and warmth of him going still, the soft, settled sound. She put her marked wrist where he could see it, which she had noticed early on that he seemed to like, the small eyes often drifting to it, as though something in the mark was familiar to him, in a way she could not explain. She sat with him until he slept. She thought about Hale's face when Agnes had said, "It is the seal." She thought about the shift in his shoulders. She thought about the thing Colin had said, that Hale would not approach her directly, that what he would do was watch and wait for something to use. She knew that kind of waiting. She had spent her whole life in the presence of people who were waiting for her to give them a reason. She was very good at not giving reasons. But this was not Ashford, and the stakes were not a cold shoulder at the settlement market, or a better job going to someone with a higher rank. The stakes here had already killed a woman, and left a baby in the snow. She looked at Eli's sleeping face. 8 weeks old, and already at the center of things people were willing to do terrible things about. She thought about Lyra, who had managed to get him out. She thought about the unnamed woman who had carried him south, and then left him in the forest rather than lead anyone to where she was going. She thought, they were not protected by a seal. She looked at her wrist. She thought, I am. And whatever that meant, whatever the full weight of it turned out to be, she intended to use it. Outside her window, the palace grounds were lit with the low orange light of late afternoon. The snow had been cleared from the paths. Guards moved along the inner wall, with the steady pattern of people who had done this so many times it was automatic. She watched them for a while, those steady movements, and something settled in her that had been unsettled since the night in the forest. Some internal shifting that finally came to rest, in a position she recognized. She was not scared anymore. She was paying attention, and paying attention felt, right now, like the most important thing she could do. She pulled Eli closer and stayed by the fire until the light changed. The scholar's name was Owen Bright, and he was perhaps the oldest person Sarah had seen in the palace, a thin, careful man who moved between his library shelves with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned long ago that the library had strong opinions about things being put back in the wrong place. He wore his white hair in a loose arrangement that was not quite a braid and not quite nothing, and his eyes behind their glass lenses were sharp in the way of eyes that had spent decades reading things written by people who were no longer available to be questioned about what they meant. Kalian had sent her to him on the 7th day, not as a command. He had come to her rooms in the morning, when Eli was in the middle of his alert, awake time, the window in each day, when he seemed most interested in the world, and made small sounds that might, eventually, become something like language, and Kalian had sat on the floor with his back against the crib, because the chair was occupied, and he had not asked Sarah to move, and he had watched his son look at the ceiling, and said, "I want Owen to see you." "Why?" she had asked. "Because he knows the seal better than anyone alive, and because there's something in the records I think he needs to tell you directly." He had not told her what. So she had gone to the library. Owen Bright met her at the door, which suggested he had been watching for her, and walked her to a table near the back where he had already arranged several large books, some opened, some marked with pieces of cloth. He looked at her wrist before she had offered it, the way a doctor looked at a patient's injury, before asking how it happened. "Sit," he said. She sat. He sat across from her and folded his hands on the table and looked at her with the focused, organizing expression of someone about to give a great deal of information and deciding the most efficient order for it. "Do you know the origin story of the seal?" he asked. "A farmhand," she said. 300 years ago. A royal infant in a collapsed stable." He nodded. "That is the short version. The accurate version is slightly more complicated." He opened the largest book to a marked page and turned it toward her. The text was old, the handwriting careful but faded, and there were diagrams in the margins. The seal was created by the 3rd generation of the royal line, in response to a specific crisis. There had been 3 attempts on the life of the heir in as many years. 2 were from external enemies. 1 was from within the palace itself. He paused to let that land. The royal bloodline at that time had an advisor, a woman named Karis, who was an Omega from a mountain settlement in the east. She had no political position, no rank in the formal sense, but she had been with the family since the king's mother was a child, and she was trusted in the particular way that people are trusted when they have never once done a thing for personal gain. When the 3rd attempt nearly succeeded, it was Karis who intervened. Not a guard, not a soldier. Karis. "What happened to her?" Sarah asked. "She survived," Owen said. "The attacker did not." After that, the then-king asked his scholars to find a way to formalize what Karis was to the royal line. Not a title, because a title could be given to someone who did not deserve it, and taken from someone who did. Something that could not be given, or taken. Something that recognized what a person was, rather than what they were called. "The seal," Sarah said. "The seal," he confirmed. "It took 11 years to create. The scholars who worked on it understood something that most formal systems of rank do not accommodate, that protection is not a skill and not a position. It is an orientation. Some people orient toward the vulnerable thing in a room, automatically, without being told to. The seal recognizes that orientation." Sarah looked at the diagram in the margin. It was a representation of the mark. She recognized the shape of it now, drawn with a precision that matched what was on her wrist. "What did Kalian want you to tell me?" she asked. Owen looked at her steadily. "That the seal does not end," he said. She was quiet. "When Karis died," he continued, "the scholars expected the seal to pass, to find the next bearer, if one was needed, or to simply dissipate. It did not. It remained on her wrist until the moment of her death, and then it transferred." "To who?" "To her daughter," he said, "who had never been near the royal family, who had grown up in the East and had a life entirely separate from the palace. The seal went to her overnight, and she woke the next morning with the mark and a sense of direction, is how the record describes it, a pull toward the palace. She arrived 3 days before the heir faced the next threat." Sarah's hand went, without her deciding, to her wrist. "The seal doesn't leave," she said. "No," Owen said, "and it does not transfer until the bearer's death. While you live, you are Eli's guardian, not by appointment, not by law, not even by your own choice in the forest, by the nature of the thing that recognized itself in you." She absorbed this. "And if I have children of my own?" "The record is unclear on that," he said carefully. "Karis had 1 child, and the seal transferred to that child. But whether that is the rule or simply the one case we have good records for, I cannot say with confidence." She looked at the book. She looked at the diagram. She thought about the fire in her wrist that night in the forest. the feeling of something pressing in. "Did Kalian read this?" she asked. "He found it," Owen said. "He brought it to me to verify. He wanted you to hear it from someone who could answer your questions about it, because the text is complex, and his ability to explain it without creating more confusion than clarity was limited." She almost smiled at the frank assessment of the king's explanatory abilities coming from his own scholar. "He knew," she said slowly. "When he looked at my wrist and looked away, he already knew it wasn't going to transfer or fade. I believe he understood the implications very quickly, yes." She sat with that for a moment. The implications being that she was not a temporary arrangement. She was not a problem to be solved, or a situation to be managed. She was, in the language of the oldest records, the permanent guardian of the royal heir, for the span of her natural life, regardless of what Hale or his council, or anyone else in this palace preferred. "Thank you, Owen," she said. "There's one more thing," he said. She waited. He turned to a different page, earlier in the book, more worn. "In the case of Karis," he said, "the relationship between the guardian and the king became a matter of considerable historical discussion. Not because of anything improper, but because the seal, over time, created a secondary effect that no one had anticipated." She looked at him. "The orientation," he said carefully. "The instinct that the seal recognizes. It does not stay contained to the child. It tends to extend, toward the family the child belongs to, toward the protection of the bloodline more broadly." He met her eyes. Karis, who had no particular connection to the king before the seal appeared, was, by all accounts, deeply loyal to him within a year, not deferential, not subservient, loyal, in the way of someone who has decided, because of who they are, that this person and this family belong to the category of things they will not let come to harm. Sarah looked at the fire for a moment. "Is that what happened to her?" she asked. "Or is that what happened to all of them?" "Every case in the records shows the same pattern," Owen said. "The seal chose the child's family followed." She stood up. She looked at her wrist. She thought about Kalian sitting on the floor of her room with his back against the crib, watching his son look at the ceiling. She thought about the tea in the corridor. She thought about the way he had said she was killed, flat and careful, holding the feeling still. She was not afraid of the information Owen had given her. She was, she discovered, something else. Something that she recognized by the way it sat in her chest, neither warm nor cold, both certain and unsettled. She was paying attention to something she had not intended to pay attention to. She thanked Owen again and left the library. In the corridor, she stopped. The palace hummed around her, that collective warmth and movement and sound of a very large household doing the things a large household did. She could hear it, this place, in a way she had not been able to on the first day. She was learning it the way she learned everything, by attention and repetition, and it was beginning to sound like something she knew. That was the thing about orientation, she thought. The scholar was right. It was not a choice. It was a characteristic. You could notice it, and you could understand it, but you could not unmake it, any more than you could unmake the fact that you heard a baby crying and walked toward the sound. She walked toward the sound. She always had. She went back to her rooms. Eli was awake and watching the doorway. When she came through it, his eyes found her, and his whole small body did its settling thing, the release of a held breath, a small sound of recognition. She picked him up. "You could have mentioned," she told him, "that this was permanent." He looked at her with his silver eyes and said nothing, which was exactly the response she expected. She sat down by the fire with him and thought about what came next, and what came next felt, for the first time since the night in the forest, less like a problem to be managed, and more like a direction she was already moving in. She could not remember when she had last been moving in a direction. She decided she did not dislike it. Fen was the last of Kalian's inner circle she met, and she met him by accident. She had taken Eli to the inner garden, on a day when the weather lifted, and the snow gave way to cold, clear air, because Dot had told her, a long time ago in a different life, that babies needed light, and the rooms were warm but dim. She had wrapped Eli in enough layers that he looked roughly spherical, which he seemed to find no particular objection to, and she had found a bench in the garden where the sun hit directly, and she sat there with him, and felt the warmth on her face, and thought about nothing specific. The man who came through the gate and stopped when he saw her was perhaps 40, with the kind of face that had clearly decided somewhere in its 30s to look weathered rather than old, and had committed to it. He had pale eyes, light brown hair, and a relaxed way of standing that suggested either that nothing much bothered him, or that he had become very practiced at appearing that way. "You must be Sarah," he said. "I must be," she agreed. "I'm Fen." He crossed to a bench nearby and sat down without asking, which she found she didn't mind. "I've been away. Just got back this morning. Colin has been sending me reports." "What did the reports say?" He looked at Eli with an expression that was something between fondness and relief, the look of someone who had been worried about something and was now looking at evidence that the worry was not fully justified, that the boy is alive and well, and that the woman who found him is not what anyone expected. What did they expect? Someone more afraid, I think, or more ambitious. Those are usually the two options for people who end up suddenly adjacent to the king. "I'm afraid," she said. "Colin said you told Helene that," Fen said. He seemed to find it reassuring. She looked at Fen. "What do you do, exactly?" "For the king. Whatever needs doing," he said. "I've been with him since we were children. His father brought me in as a companion for him when Kalian was 6. We're not the same rank. We were never pretending to be the same rank. But I know him better than most people who've spent their adult lives at this court, and that has its uses." "You were away when I arrived," she said. "Where?" "North," he said, looking into Lyra. She went still. He said it without inflection, neither as a test nor as a revelation, the way someone said a thing they expected to have to say at some point, and had decided to say directly. "Did you find anything?" she asked. "Some things," he said. "Enough to narrow the list. Not enough to close it." He paused. "Kalian has been careful about what he tells you, and when. He doesn't want to put you in a position where you know things that could make you a target before you know enough about this place to protect yourself. I think he's being overly careful, personally, but it's his call." "Does he know you're telling me this?" "He would not be surprised to learn it," Fen said. "He knows how I operate." He looked at Eli again. "The child looks like her." "He said that too," Sarah said. "She was a good person." Fen said, simply, "I want you to know that, because I think it matters, for Eli, as he gets older, what people say about her. I want the people closest to him to say true things." Sarah looked at Eli's face in the winter sun. The silver eyes closed now. The small, perfect features relaxed. "I didn't know her," she said. "No," Fen said. "But you don't have to have known someone to honor what's true about them." She thought about that. "Tell me something true about her," she said. He considered. "She laughed at things that weren't supposed to be funny," he said. "Important meetings, formal meals. Not disrespectfully, just, she had an eye for the absurd that she couldn't always contain. Kalian used to have to avoid looking at her in council, because she could make him lose his composure with one look." He paused. "He has not lost his composure since she died, not once." Sarah absorbed this in the quiet. "That's not healthy," she said. "No," he agreed. The sun moved slightly, and the warmth shifted on the bench. Eli made a small sound in his sleep, some interior dream or sensation, and both of them looked at him for a moment. "He's going to be fine," Fen said. He did not say it as reassurance. He said it as a statement of intent, the way someone said it when they meant to make it true. "With you here, he's going to be fine." She did not know how to take that. She had not been in a place long enough to be told that her presence made something fine. "I hope you're right," she said. "I usually am," he said, with the light delivery of someone who knew it was a presumptuous thing to say, and said it anyway, because the alternative was false modesty. Ask anyone. She did almost smile that time. They sat in the winter sun until Eli woke up and demanded, in his eloquent wordless way, to be moved, and then they went inside, and Fen walked with her back through the garden gate, and pointed out 3 things along the way: 2 structural features of the palace she had not yet noticed, and 1 person visible through a window in the east wing. "That's Aldrich Neal," he said, "Hale's closest ally on the council. He is very careful not to do anything overt, but Hale's opinions do not stay Hale's opinions. They become Neal's opinions. Then they become the opinions of the other 2, and then they become what the council apparently thinks." "Which 2?" He named them. She filed them. And who is reliable? She asked. He named 3. She filed those too. She walked back to her rooms with Eli, and a considerably clearer map of the landscape than she had started the morning with, and she thought that Fen, who had not seemed alarmed by anything, probably knew exactly how useful his casual conversation in the garden had been. She thought that she liked him. She thought that liking people in this place was something she would have to be careful with, because liking was the beginning of trust, and trust, misplaced, in a palace where Lyra had been killed and Eli had been left in the snow, was not a small risk. But you could not live in perfect watchfulness. She had learned that long before she came here. You had to pick your people and trust them and be ready to be wrong. She was picking carefully. 3 weeks into her life at the palace, Sarah stopped thinking of it as a place she was staying, and started thinking of it as a place she lived. The distinction was small, but it changed things. When you were staying somewhere, you kept your arrangements loose, you kept one mental foot pointed toward the door, you treated the unfamiliar things as temporarily unfamiliar, on loan. When you lived somewhere, you unpacked, you learned the morning sounds. You started to know which floorboard creaked and which door needed to be lifted slightly to close quietly. You made it yours in the smallest ways, because humans, and wolves, needed to make things theirs, or they couldn't rest. She was resting. Eli was growing. Not dramatically, not in ways visible day to day, but in aggregate, so that when she compared the weight of him in her arms on the first night in the forest to the weight of him now, there was something solid and decided about him that had not been there before. He was eating well. He was sleeping in longer stretches. He had started making sounds that were clearly meant to communicate, specific pitches and tones for specific things, and he understood the difference between people in a way that was becoming more distinct each day. He knew Sarah. He knew Kalian, in a way that was quieter and more careful, but real. He knew Fen, who made faces at him in an undignified manner that was, Sarah thought, enormously endearing. He knew Helene, who held him with the competent affection of someone who had raised children and found babies acceptable. He knew Bryn, the young household staff member who had a gift for keeping him entertained. He did not know Edric Hale, because Hale had not come near him, and Sarah had no intention of changing that. She said this to Kalian on a morning when they were both in her sitting room, which had become, by gradual mutual habit, an occasional meeting place. Not scheduled, not formal. One or the other of them would be there with tea, and the other would appear, and they would talk about Eli and the palace and the things that were happening in it, and she had noticed that the conversations had expanded slowly from the specific to the broader, from Eli's habits to the council, to the territory politics, to the nature of the old laws, and she thought that this expansion was probably mutual, and probably not entirely about logistics. She said it without preamble, because she was not someone who built up to things. Hale hasn't come near Eli. No, Ferlian said. He was standing at the window. He stood at windows a lot. She had decided this was because standing gave him something to do with his height when he was thinking, and because windows gave him something to look at that was not the person he was talking to, which he sometimes needed. He's been careful since the inquiry. Careful is different from finished, she said. Yes. He said something to Neil after the inquiry. I couldn't hear it, but Neil's behavior changed after it. Scalian turned from the window. In what way? He started eating in the hall instead of his rooms, she said, which means he's watching something. A pause. You notice that. I notice where people eat, she said. It tells you whether they want to be seen. He looked at her with the expression she had started to think of as the assessment one, the look that was not evaluating her worth, but was recalibrating something he had already understood. She got it often when she said things he had not expected her to know or notice. Neil wants to be seen, he said. By someone specific, she said. He's sat in sightlines of the East Corridor 4 times in the past week. The East Corridor is where the visiting envoys from Lord Gareth's house have been housed, Kalian said. He said it quietly, like something clicking into a place it had been trying to reach. She waited. Lord Gareth Wynn, he said. Northern Territory. One of the 3 houses I told you about. The one that finds instability commercially useful. What does he want? She said. Contracts, Kalian said. Trade routes through the Northern Pass. I've been negotiating with him for 2 years. Every time we're close to a resolution, something shifts, either from his side or mine. He paused. If Hale and Neil are communicating with Wynn's people, they're giving Wynn's people information about my position before it leaves my desk. She looked at him. Is that something you suspected before? I suspected it, he said. I didn't have the thread. Neil eating in the hall doesn't prove it, but it points. Who else in the palace eats in the hall when they have nothing to gain from it? She asked. He thought for a moment. Almost no one. Then find out who Neil has spoken to in the past week, she said. Not what was said, just who. The pattern will show itself. He looked at her steadily. She looked back. You could have been on the council, he said. Not flattery. An observation. I could not have been on the council, she said. I'm an Omega from Ashford with no lineage. You know what I mean. I know what you mean, she said. But knowing what someone means and letting them romanticize your situation are different things. The ghost of something moved through his expression. Not quite amusement. Something that sat next to it. I'm not romanticizing your situation, he said. You said could have been. Past tense, hypothetical, which is a way of acknowledging a structural unfairness by relocating it to a world that doesn't exist. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. She had not expected him to say that. She had expected him to deflect or defend. He did neither. I'll find out who Neil has been talking to, he said. She nodded. Tell me what you find. Not after you've decided what to do with it. Before. Another pause. Why before? Because I might see something you don't, she said. Not because I'm smarter, because I'm looking from a different position. He nodded. He turned back to the window. She thought about what Fen had said in the garden, about how Kalian had not lost his composure once since Lyra died. She thought about the set of his shoulders right now, always slightly more tension than necessary, always that fraction of effort that suggested someone holding something steady by decision rather than by ease. Kalian, she said. He looked over his shoulder. Fen says you haven't been sleeping. A pause. Fen says a number of things. He does, she said. He's usually right. You told me that yourself, indirectly. He turned to face her, and his expression was complicated in a way she did not fully read. Several things moving under the surface of it. I sleep enough, he said. Your study light is on, until well past midnight most nights, she said. I can see it from my window. You're watching my study light at midnight. I'm awake with Eli at midnight, she said. The light is visible. I have eyes. Something shifted in his expression that was not quite amusement and not quite something else, and lived precisely in the territory between them. He looked at her for a moment with that full, present quality that she had noticed from the first day, that quality of actually looking. I have a lot to do, he said. I know, she said. Some of it could wait until morning. Some of it cannot. Some of it can. He looked at her. She looked at him. I'll sleep earlier, he said finally. Thank you, she said. He left. She sat in the chair by the fire and looked at Eli, who was on his back on a blanket on the floor, engaged with a wooden toy that Fen had brought him, turning it in his hands with the focused seriousness of someone working out a problem. She thought about the thread between Hale and Neil and Wynn, and how it was the kind of thing that, if it was what it looked like, had been going on for longer than anyone knew, and had already done damage that couldn't be undone. She thought about Lyra. She thought about the unnamed woman who had carried Eli south. She thought about what Kalian had said. I have strong suspicions. I don't have proof. She looked at her wrist. The seal was warm, as it always was when she was paying attention to it. She was starting to believe that the warmth was a response rather than a property, that it changed with her state, hotter when she was alert, quieter when she was at rest. Right now it was warm. She picked Eli up from the blanket. He grabbed her wrist, as he often did, the small fingers finding the mark with the unerring accuracy that she had stopped trying to explain. We're going to figure it out, she told him. He looked at her with his silver eyes. She believed herself. The next 3 days were quiet on the surface and not quiet underneath. Kalian had set Colin to work on the question of Neil's movements. Fen, who had returned to the palace and shown no sign of intending to leave again soon, was doing something in the outer settlements that he described vaguely as following strings. She did not ask him to be more specific, because she understood that specificity sometimes required precision that was not yet available. She focused on what she could do. She walked the palace. She had been doing this in small doses since the first week, but she expanded it, mapping the building in her mind with the same patient attention she had given everything else. She knew her own rooms, and the library, and the council room, and the main hall. Now she added the East Wing, which was where the visiting envoys were housed, the West Wing, which was residential, where the council members had their palace rooms, the ground level, which was where the working functions of the palace happened, the outer buildings. She noticed things. She noticed that the two envoys from Win's house were men, in their 40s, who moved through the palace with the relaxed confidence of people who felt at home here, not like visitors, like people who came regularly enough to have established patterns. She noticed that one of them, a lean man with a short beard, named by his own introduction as Hart, crossed paths with Neil twice in 2 days, in places that were not on the obvious route between their rooms and the places they needed to be. She noticed that Hart, when he noticed her noticing, smiled the specific smile of someone who had decided that she was not a relevant variable. That specific smile she had learned in 30 years always preceded the moment when the person wearing it discovered they were wrong. She went to Kalian. She told him what she had seen. He listened. Then he did something she had not expected. He told her about the contracts. All of them, not the version he had been offering in negotiations, but the actual position, the real numbers, the real sticking point, which was a clause about rite of passage through the northern pass that Win had been resisting, for reasons that had never quite added up. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "He doesn't want the contracts finalized." Kalian looked at her. "Think about it," she said. "If the contracts are signed, Win's position in the negotiations is over. He loses the access he has to your council. He loses the reason to have people here, to maintain this relationship, to receive information about your position before it's official. The contracts being unresolved is worth more to him than the contracts being signed." Kalian was very still. "He's been negotiating in bad faith for 2 years," she said. A long silence. "Yes," he said. He said it with the flatness that she now knew meant he was containing something he would deal with privately. "So what do you want to do about it?" she asked. He looked at her. "I want to close the trap," he said. "I need to know what Hale and Neil have been passing to Hart before I move. If I move without that, Win will claim ignorance, and nothing can be proven." "How long?" she said. "A week," he said. "Maybe less." "All right," she said. "A week." She went back to her rooms. She thought about how long things had been quietly wrong in this palace, how many layers there were, and how each one she helped to lift revealed another underneath. She thought about Eli, who would grow up in this place, and what she wanted that place to be for him. She thought, a week. She could do a week. It was 4 days, not 7. On the 4th day, Colin came to her rooms with a document in his hand, and the expression of someone who had been up all night, arriving at something. He spread the document on her table. It was a list of dates, places, and names in his careful handwriting. "Hart met Neil 7 times in 6 weeks, he said. 3 of those meetings were in the East Wing corridor. The other 4 were in places that don't appear in either man's official schedule. She looked at the list. What was passed? "We believe." A summary of Kalian's actual negotiating limits on the passage clause. The number he would settle for in private, that he would not state publicly. The figure that would close the deal if Win offered it, which Win has never offered because he knew Kalian would accept it, which would end the negotiations. She looked up. They were keeping the negotiations alive on purpose. "We believe so," Colin said. "If Win's people knew Kalian's true number, and Win never offered it, then the only reason to know it was to ensure he never offered it. To keep the access going," she said. "Yes." She stood up. "Does Kalian have this?" "He's reading his copy now," Colin said. She went to find him. He was in his study, and he had clearly been standing at the window again, because he was at his desk now, but the window was where he had been, and she had learned to read the difference between the 2 positions in him. The desk was where he worked. The window was where he processed. "I saw it," she said. "Yes," he said. "What do you do now?" He looked at the document. Then he looked at her. "I end it," he said. "The negotiations, the access. The arrangement. All of it. Today. Hale and Neil? Their positions on the council are under review, pending a formal inquiry, he said. Not one like the kind Hale called about you. A real one. She nodded. Wynn's people are being asked to leave the palace by evening, he said. Politely. Formally. With all the courtesy appropriate to a diplomatic severance. His voice was level and deliberate. The voice of someone who has decided exactly how angry they are allowed to be, and is staying precisely on that line. Will Wynn retaliate? She asked. Probably, he said. Through channels. Trade pressure, border complications. Nothing he can escalate openly without acknowledging why. So you'll be in a slow war. I was already in a slow war, he said. At least now I know where the front is. She looked at him. He looked at her. This was your observation, he said. The East Corridor, Hart and Neil. You found the thread. I had time to watch, she said. You didn't. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant, she said. And I meant what I said. The position I stand in lets me see things you can't, from where you stand. That's not a criticism of your position. It's just the geometry of it. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. She nodded. She started to go. Sarah. She stopped. He was not at the window now. He was looking at her directly. I know this is not what your life was going to be, he said. I know you had things. A home. People. A direction that made sense to you. I know that what happened in the forest happened to you, not for you. I know the seal doesn't ask permission. She held his gaze. I'm aware that I've been the mechanism of most of the difficult things in your life for the past month, he said. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I just want you to know that I'm aware of it. She thought about what to say. She thought about the forest, the crying, the cold hand on her wrist. She thought about her mother's house. She thought about 30 years of being in Omega, in a small settlement, where everything was arranged in a way that put her at the bottom of the arrangement. The seal didn't put me in a position I wouldn't have chosen, she said finally. It put me in a position I couldn't have reached. He looked at her. She left. She walked back to her rooms, through corridors she now knew by heart, past the staircase that turned twice, past the window that showed the inner garden, past the door with the catch that needed lifting. She was home. The expulsion of Wynn's envoys happened quietly, which she understood was by design. When things happened loudly in a palace, they became the story. When they happened quietly, the facts emerged later, already final, without the noise of people choosing sides before the outcome was clear. Colin coordinated it. Fen assisted in a way he was vague about. The envoys left before evening, as promised, with their luggage and their horses and their composed faces that showed nothing, which told her they had been expecting something like this at some point, and had prepared. Hart, leaving last, passed her in the outer yard. He stopped. He looked at her mark. Then he smiled again, the same smile from before, and walked on. She watched him go through the gate. The smile was still the wrong response. She filed that, and thought about what it meant. The formal inquiry into Hale and Neil began the following week. Kalian handled it with the same deliberate care he brought to everything that required precision, involving the council members who were not under suspicion, giving each step its proper time, not rushing toward a conclusion because he was angry, which he was, but not letting that anger make the process sloppy. Sloppy processes she had come to understand watching him work, created vulnerabilities that could be used later by people who wanted to say the outcome was unjust. Hale and Neil were suspended from council duties, pending the inquiry's conclusion. The council was 5 members lighter than it had been when she arrived, which meant it was also less arranged against Eli's future. She thought about this in the evenings, sitting by the fire. How much had already shifted in a few weeks? How much remained? Eli was 3 months old now, growing in visible ways, his legs stronger, his grip deliberate rather than reflexive, his eyes tracking everything with an intelligence that was becoming harder to dismiss as baby attentiveness. He was figuring out the world in real time, piece by piece, and the intensity with which he went about it made her think of Kalian. The same quality of attention, the same thoroughness. She did not say this to anyone. One Tuesday, in the middle of the inquiry and the diplomatic aftermath of the Wynn severance, Kalian came to her rooms with tea, as had become occasional habit. But he came later than usual, after the third hour, when Eli had been asleep for a while and the palace was quieter. He knocked, which he had always done. She opened the door. She had been awake, reading by lamplight, one of the historical texts Owen Bright had suggested. He looked at what she was reading. His expression did something brief and sideways. "Come in," she said. He came in. He handed her one of the cups, and took the other one, and looked at the book on the chair. "Owen's been recommending those to you," he said. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "I'm glad. He knows more about the old law than anyone. What he tells you will be reliable." She sat back down with her tea. He sat in the other chair, the one closer to the fire, which he always took without her offering it, which had initially surprised her, and now simply seemed correct. He looked at the fire. "Hart smiled at you when he left," he said. She looked at him. "You saw that." "I was told," he said, "by someone whose job includes telling me things." "It was the same smile from before," she said. "The one that means I don't count." And it means he's still not worried," she said, "which means whatever he thinks is coming isn't derailed by his being sent out of the palace." Kalian was still looking at the fire. "I've been thinking the same thing." "What do you think is coming?" she asked. "A direct move," he said. "Not through channels, not through council manipulation or trade pressure. Something more immediate." She was quiet. "They haven't stopped wanting Eli removed from the equation," he said. He said it plainly, the way he said hard things. What they've lost is the slow method, the patient method, the method that would have taken years and looked like it happened naturally. "So they'll use a faster one," she said. "I believe so," he said. She held her cup. "When?" "I don't know. Soon. Probably while the inquiry is still ongoing, because the inquiry is consuming most of the formal attention in this palace, and some of the informal attention as well. Timing an action for when your opponent is looking at something else is basic." She thought about this for a long moment. She thought about the layout of the palace, the exits she still catalogued out of habit, the guards' patterns, which she knew because she had watched them. "The nursery passage," she said. He looked at her. "There's a passage between the inner garden and the nursery wing," she said. "It's used mostly by the household staff in the morning. There's a point in it, just before the turn to the east staircase, where the guard changeover leaves a gap." 4 minutes. He was very still. "I noticed it 3 weeks ago," she said. "I was going to tell you. Then the Neil situation developed and I thought I had more time." He said, very carefully, "You have been mapping this palace." "Yes," she said. "I was going to mention that." A silence. "How long ago did you start?" "First week," she said. Another silence. "The nursery passage," he said. He set down his cup. He stood up. "I'll have the changeover restructured tonight." "And the east garden gate," she said. "It latches, but the latch is loose. If someone pushed it firmly from the outside, it would open." He looked at her. "I'll have it welded shut," he said. He was at the door. "Kalian," she said. He stopped. "Be careful," she said. "When you go to fix these things, don't do it alone." He looked back at her. His expression was complicated again, moving through several things. "I was going to have guards do it," he said. "Good," she said. "Take Fen with you." "Sarah." "I know you're capable," she said. "I know this is a basic administrative correction. I also know that people who are shifting to a faster method may be watching for exactly the moment when you move to correct something." He held her gaze for a moment. "Take Fen," she said again. "All right," he said. He left. She heard him in the corridor, speaking to the guard outside, and then a second voice, farther away, Fen's, which meant Fen had been nearby, which meant either coincidence or that Fen had formed the same assessment she had and was already positioned accordingly. She sat back down. The fire had burned lower. She added a piece of wood from the basket beside it. She thought about Hart's smile. She thought about the gap in the nursery passage, and the loose latch, and the 4 minutes of the guard changeover. She thought about the fact that she had been planning to mention these things and had not, because first one thing had needed immediate attention, and then another, and she had let herself believe she had more time. That belief, she thought, had been a mistake. Comfortable time was the enemy of sharp attention. She would not make that mistake again. She went and stood over Eli's crib. He was deeply asleep, both arms flung wide, his face completely peaceful. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the texture of the room around him, the shadows and the light and the distances between things, and she thought about what was inside this palace and what might be trying to get in. She sat in the chair beside the crib, and she did not go back to bed. She was there when Fen knocked softly on her door at the second hour. She opened the door. He was in his traveling coat, which was unusual. "The East Garden gate is welded," he said. "The nursery passage changeover is restructured effective immediately." He paused. There was someone in the outer grounds. She felt the statement arrive. "Who?" she said. "We don't know yet," he said. "They were seen and moved before they were caught. The outer guards are looking." He looked at her steadily. "You were right to say it when you did." She nodded. "Is Kalian all right?" she asked. "He's fine," Fen said. "He's directing the outer search. He wanted me to come tell you." "Tell me to go to sleep?" she said. "Tell you what was happening," Fen said. "He said you would want to know." She looked at him for a moment. "He was right," she said. Fen nodded. He was about to leave, then stopped. "The person in the grounds," he said. "They moved in a way that suggested someone who knew the layout." "Which means someone told them the layout," she said. "Yes," he said. "Who has left the palace in the last 2 weeks?" Fen looked at her with the expression of someone who had already begun this calculation, and was reassured to see someone else arrive at it from a different direction. "The Wynn envoys," he said, "and 4 household staff members who took their regular leave." "The household staff," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll start there." He left. She went back to the chair by Eli's crib and sat down. The palace was alive outside her door. Guards moving, voices in the corridors, the particular sound of a large, well-trained security force doing its job with speed and quiet. Eli slept through all of it. She sat with her wrist on the armrest where the firelight caught the mark, and she thought about Hart's smile, and she thought about how a person smiled when they still expected to win, and she thought about what it would take to change that expectation. She was going to figure it out. She always figured things out. It was the only thing she had ever fully trusted in herself, and she intended to keep trusting it. The fire burned. The palace searched. Eli's small chest rose and fell. She stayed awake until morning. The household staff member was a young man named Owen, no relation to the scholar, who had been at the palace for 8 months, and had taken his leave time the day after Wynn's envoys departed. Colin confirmed this. Fen confirmed it secondarily. They found him in the outer settlement, and when they found him, they found, among his belongings, a hand-drawn map of the palace's inner grounds. It was not a good map, incomplete in several places and wrong in 2, but it was close enough to be useful to someone who already knew the location of what they were looking for. Sarah studied a copy of it that Colin brought her. The nursery passage was marked. The East Garden gate was marked. Her rooms were marked, not by name but by location, which meant whoever had drawn the original, or dictated the contents, knew the palace's internal arrangement in enough detail to identify her rooms specifically. She put the copy down. She looked at Colin. "Is he talking?" "He will," Colin said, with the measured certainty of someone who had experience with these things. "When he does," she said, "I want to know who specifically asked for the location of my rooms." Colin nodded. He was right that the young man would talk. He did, by evening, which was faster than she had expected, and told her that his commitment to whoever had hired him was not deep. He named 3 people who had contacted him over the course of his 8 months at the palace. One was a name she did not recognize. One was Hart. The third was a person she did recognize, a woman she had seen in the outer hall twice, whom she had noticed for the way she watched the palace layout rather than the people in it, which was the kind of watching that Sarah recognized because she did it herself. Her name, according to the young man, was called Greer, and she had arrived at the palace the week after Wynn's envoys departed, as a trader in household goods, and she had not left. Kalian had her found and detained before midnight. He came to Sarah afterward, not late that night, the next morning, reasonable hour, tea, the sitting room. He looked less tired than he had in weeks, which she thought was the particular wakefulness that came after something that had been a threat, became a thing contained. "She's talking," he said. What is she saying? That she was hired by someone representing Wynn's interests. That her instructions were to locate the child and report back. That she had been told a second team would handle the actual. He stopped for a fraction of a second. The next step. The fraction of a second told her everything she needed to know about what the second team had been intended to do. Did they find the second team? She asked. No, he said. Not yet. But Greer's presence here means they were expecting to have information from her before they moved. Without it, they're working partially blind. How long does that buy us? Long enough, he said. She thought about this. The map she had, she said. My rooms were marked. Yes. Not specifically as mine, but as a location. Yes. Which means whoever organized this knew or suspected that Eli was with me as much as he was with the nursery. That's my reading too, he said. She looked at her tea. They were going to come through me. He was quiet. To get to him, she said. They were going to go through me first. Probably, he said. He said it carefully, not minimizing and not dramatizing. The seal makes you the primary protective bond. Removing that bond, or attempting to, would logically precede any attempt on Eli. She absorbed this. She looked at her wrist. She thought about Lyra, who had not had a seal, who had not had anything except the fierce, practical, mortal love of a mother, and had spent it getting her son out. She thought, they went through Lyra first. Kalian, she said. He looked at her. I want to understand the full extent of what they're planning, she said. Not the immediate threat, the larger one. The whole picture. A pause. You should know it, he said. I've been careful about what I tell you, and when, and I think I've been too careful. Yes, she said. You have. He looked at her steadily. Then he said, Wynn wants the Northern Territories to fracture. He wants the central authority, meaning me and my house, to lose enough stability that the Northern Pacts begin making their own arrangements. Trade, defense, everything. He has spent 2 years engineering that instability from inside my council. He has spent more time than that, probably, cultivating allies in the outer territories who will be willing to form a coalition if he can demonstrate that the central authority cannot protect its own. His demonstration, she said, would be Eli, he said. A king who cannot protect his own heir is not capable of protecting the territory. That's the argument he would make. To the outer pacts, to anyone who is already uncertain. She understood now why Hale's manipulation of the council had been tolerated for years. Not because no one noticed. Because the connections to Wynn had not been visible until they were. Because the thing Wynn was building had been built piece by piece, in the dark, through people with legitimate positions doing small things over long time periods. How many of the outer packs are already in contact with him? She asked. We believe 7, he said. Of 43. Which 7? He told her. She filed the names and their locations, and what she knew about them, which was not much, but was something. What do you need to stop him? She said. Not his operatives here, him, the whole thing. Proof, he said. Direct, undeniable proof of what he's done. Not through intermediaries, not through Hale or Neil or Greer. Something that connects Wynn himself. And you don't have that. Not yet, he said. What I have is enough to stop the immediate threat, enough to secure Eli, and you, and the palace, not enough to close Wynn's operation entirely. She thought about Hart's smile. She thought about the way he had looked at her mark. She thought about what it meant that he still was not worried, even with his envoys expelled and his palace contact detained. He has something else, she said. Kalian looked at her. Hart smiled when he left, she said. He's not worried, which means he knows something is in place that we haven't found yet. A long silence. I've been thinking the same thing, Kalian said. Then we have to find it, she said, before he uses it. He nodded. She stood up. She looked at Eli, who was on the blanket on the floor again, working with patient, earnest concentration on a second wooden toy that Fen had provided. She thought about 7 weeks ago, which was approximately a lifetime. She thought about the border forest, and the snow, and the cold, and the crying, and how none of this, none of the palace, or the politics, or the mark, or the king, or the slow, careful danger threading through everything, had been in the world she was walking through that night. She was not sorry. She realized, fully awake in a way she had not been in years. The kind of awake that came from standing in the middle of something that mattered, where every decision, and every observation, and every carefully held thread could determine whether a small boy with silver eyes grew up in safety or not. She was not sorry. She bent down and picked Eli up from the blanket. He grabbed her wrist. The mark was warm. The thing Hart had left in place was not a person. Fenn found it on a Friday, 3 days after Greer's detention, in the form of a sealed letter in the palace's outgoing correspondence that had not been sent through the official channels. It had been placed in a secondary courier's bag, the kind used for less formal correspondence, addressed to a merchant house in the Eastern Territory that Fenn identified, after 2 hours of checking, as a cover for Wynn's financial operations. He brought the letter to Kalian, and Kalian brought it to Sarah, who was in the garden with Eli, because it was one of the brief good-weather windows that winter allowed, and she had been using them whenever they appeared. "It's not from Greer," Kalian said. He was reading as he walked, which was a habit she had seen him exercise before, and found it simultaneously impressive and slightly alarming. "It's from someone still inside the palace." She held Eli tighter, without noticing she had done it. "Read me the important part," she said. He read it. The important part was specific. A date, 4 days from now, a method, and a location. The location was the inner courtyard. The date was the day of the formal ceremony marking the council inquiry's conclusion, which Kalian had been planning for a week, which was a public event that would gather most of the palace's important population in one place. The method described was not surgical. It was broad. She looked at Kalian. "Someone told them about the ceremony," she said. "Someone who is still here knew about it," he confirmed. "The ceremony was only decided 6 days ago. The circle of people who knew was small." "How small?" 12, he said. She thought about 12 people. She thought about which of the 12 she had interacted with, and how. Which ones she had formed assessments of. Which ones had given her anything to hold on to. "The letter names a method," she said. "Can the method be disrupted if they don't know we found the letter?" Kalian looked at her. "Explain." "If we respond to this letter by canceling the ceremony, or dramatically changing security, whoever wrote it knows we found it. They disappear. We never identify them. But if we keep the ceremony as planned, adjust the security in ways that aren't visible, and account for the method," she paused, "we might catch the person who wrote the letter in the act." Silence. "That's a significant risk," he said. "Yes," she said. "You and Eli would not be in the ceremony," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a statement of what he was going to require. "I wasn't planning to be," she said. "Colin and Fenn will need to talk to them now," she said. "All of them. Today. Before someone realizes the letter didn't arrive." He was already moving. She looked down at Eli. He was watching a bird that had landed on the garden wall. His whole body was angled toward it with the focused intensity he brought to all new things. His small hand extended toward it, even though it was 12 feet away, and he could not do anything useful with the extending. She thought about the 4 days. She thought about the person in the palace who had written that letter, who was still here, still moving through corridors she moved through, still sharing the air of a place she had started to think of as home. She felt, for the first time in weeks, the specific, bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with weather. She let it pass through her. Then she picked up Eli and went inside. The next 4 days were the most careful of Sarah's life. She went about her routines without deviation. She ate at the usual times, walked the usual routes, appeared in the usual places. She made sure that nothing she did suggested anything had changed. This required a quality of performance she had not previously been called upon to provide, and she was surprised to discover she could do it, that the 30 years of making herself invisible in rooms that did not want her had given her a skill she had not known she was building. She watched. The 12 people who had known about the ceremony moved through the palace, and she watched all of them in the incremental, patient way she had learned. She was looking for the specific quality she had seen before in Hart and in Greer, the looking at the layout rather than the people, the awareness of distances and exits. She was looking for someone who was calibrating something. On the 3rd day, she found it. It was not in the 12. It was someone adjacent to one of the 12, a man she had seen many times in the corridors without ever having been introduced. A man who was part of the administrative support for the council inquiry, who had legitimate access to most of the palace and no particular reason to be noticed. His name, she discovered through Helene Voss and a very carefully phrased question about the council inquiry's staff, was Den Caldwell. He had been at the palace for 2 years, hired from the outer territories, with references that Helene said had been checked at the time and found to be satisfactory. She told Colin. Colin, she was learning, was exactly as capable as Calian trusted him to be, which was more than most people would have guessed from his quiet demeanor. He checked Den Caldwell in 4 hours and came back with 3 things: a discrepancy in his original references that had been missed on the initial check, a communication pattern over 2 years that connected him to a name that connected to Wynne, and a key card for a storage room in the palace's lower level that Caldwell should not have had. They did not arrest him before the ceremony. They kept watching. The day of the ceremony arrived, cold and gray but clear, the inner courtyard prepared for the formal event, the council members present, the household staff arranged, the guards distributed with the careful, unremarkable spacing that Fen and Colin had arranged to look ordinary but was not. Sarah was not in the courtyard. She was in her rooms. Eli was with her. Bryn was with them both, for the specific reason that Sarah wanted another pair of eyes in the room and trusted Bryn's eyes. The door was guarded by 2 people she had specifically requested, not palace regulars, but people from Calian's personal unit, chosen for this day. She sat in the chair by the fire and waited. The ceremony had been going for 20 minutes when she heard it. Not from the courtyard, not from outside, from the corridor directly outside her rooms, the sound of something hitting the floor, a small, definitive sound, and then a second sound, harder, and then nothing. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand. Bryn had Eli. She had already moved to the far wall, which was the instruction, and she held him with the careful tightness of someone who had been told what to do, and was doing it exactly. Sarah crossed to the door. She did not open it. She put her back to the wall beside it, and felt the mark on her wrist go from warm to bright, not visibly, not to anyone looking, but to her. To whatever the seal had made of the space between her skin and the world, it was burning. A sound, right outside the door. Breathing. The handle moved. She had told the 2 guards what she expected. She had told them this morning, specifically, that if something happened during the ceremony, it would not be at the ceremony. She had told them to watch the corridor, not just the door, and to trust the mark if she called. She had not called, because the door had not opened yet, and the guards were outside, and she did not know what was in the corridor with them, or whether they were still standing. She looked at Bryn. Bryn looked at her. Eli, who should not have understood any of this, turned his head toward the door with the same focused attention he turned on everything, and he made a sound she had not heard from him before. Not his soft, settled sound, not crying. Something that was both of those things and neither of them, a sound that seemed too large for his small body, a sound that sat in the room like a command. The door opened. One of her guards came through it, which was correct, which was what should happen, but his face was wrong, was the wrong configuration of tension and intent. She had seen that configuration before, on Hart, on Greer. Her guard was not her guard anymore. He had 3 feet of distance on her. She did not think about the 3 feet. She thought about Bryn against the far wall with Eli, and the door behind the man, and the distance between the man and both of those things. She moved. Not backward. Not toward Bryn. Toward him. He had not expected that. She could see it in the half-second of recalibration, and that half-second was what she needed, and she used it the way she used everything, completely. She hit the arm first, the hand that held what it was holding, her full weight into the joint, and the object in his hand hit the floor, and she was between him and Eli before he had finished reacting. Her wrist. The mark was not warm. It was not bright. It was something else, something she did not have a word for, something that pressed outward from the inside of her skin and filled the space between her and the man in front of her with a quality she could feel, and he apparently could too, because he went still. Not her strength. She had no illusions about her strength compared to a trained operative. Not fear. Something older. The door hit the wall. Fen came through it at speed, and behind him, one of the real guards, and behind that person Colin, and the room reorganized itself around the man in the center of it, with the practiced speed of people who had been waiting for exactly this. It was over in 11 seconds. She was standing between the man and Eli. Bryn was against the wall, with Eli pressed against her, and her eyes very wide. The room was full of people who were not threats. Sarah's wrist was warm again, just warm. She looked at Eli. He looked at her. His face was entirely calm, which was the most frightening and the most comforting thing she had ever seen. He looked at her with those silver eyes, and he made his soft, settled sound, the one that meant she was there, and she crossed the room and took him from Bryn and held him. She was shaking. She did not let him feel it. "The ceremony," she said, to Fen. "Caldwell was taken before anything could happen," Fen said. He was breathing harder than usual, which told her he had moved fast to get here. "The ceremony is finished. No one was harmed." "The guard," she said, "the one who came through the door." "Your other guard has him," Colin said, from the doorway. "He's talking." She nodded. She sat down in the chair with Eli, because her legs had decided they had been standing long enough. Eli put his hand on her wrist. She exhaled. She heard Kalian in the corridor before she saw him, heard his voice, the quick, sharp quality it had when he was covering the distance between having been told something and arriving at the place the thing was. He came through the door. He looked at her. He looked at Eli. He exhaled in a way that she recognized from the outside, that specific release of held breath that came after something terrible had been possible and then had not happened. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her more carefully. The shaking had not entirely stopped, and she thought he could probably see it. "Sarah," he said. "Just her name." "I'm all right," she said. She met his eyes. "We're all right." He stood in the doorway, and he did not come closer, and he did not look away, and she held his gaze, and held Eli, and let the shaking work its way out. "My guard was not my guard," she said. "I know," he said. "Caldwell had someone get to him 2 days ago. We're working out when and how. Hart planned this before he left," she said. "He had this in place before the envoys were sent out." "Yes," he said. She had known it. The smile. The complete lack of worry on a face that should have been worried. "It didn't work," she said. "No," he said. "Because you found the letter. Because you suggested we look at the letter differently," he said. She looked at Eli. He was looking at Kalian, with his silver eyes, that same focused attention. Kalian looked back at his son, and the expression on his face was the unguarded one, the one that appeared briefly and was not meant for an audience. She had seen it several times now. She thought she was beginning to know what it held. She said nothing. She let him have it. The week after the ceremony was quieter than any week Sarah had spent at the palace, and she did not trust the quiet, which meant she spent it the way she spent busy weeks, paying attention, watching, filing. Caldwell and the compromised guard both provided information. The information went to Colin, who organized it, and to Kalian, who used it, and to Fen, who went north with it. Fen was gone for 11 days. When he came back with a document. It was not one document, it was a collection of them, copied by hand, obtained by means that Fen described as creative, and that she understood enough to know she did not need the details. The documents were correspondence between Wynne and Hale, going back 14 months. They were direct, they were specific. They named what was being arranged, by whom, and for what purpose, and they named it in Wynne's own handwriting, on 6 of the 14 pages. Owen Bright, the scholar, verified the handwriting. Agnes, the council's legal historian, read through the collection for 2 days, and emerged from Owen's library, with the expression of someone who has been handed precisely what they were looking for, and is not entirely sure what to do with the size of the thing. "This is sufficient," she said. She said it carefully, the way she said everything. But the care in it this time was the care of someone choosing their words around something that had significant weight. For a formal proceeding against Wynne, for territorial action, for everything that follows. Kalian did not smile when she said this. He nodded once and thanked her, and went to his study, and did not come out for the rest of that day. Sarah knocked on his study door at the 2nd hour, which was later than she usually went anywhere, with 2 cups of tea. He opened the door. She held out one of the cups. He took it and stepped back to let her in. The study was as it always was. Papers and maps, fire burning, the smell of old records and lamp oil. He sat at his desk and she sat across from it. In the chair she had learned was the one for people he was actually talking to, rather than the chairs arranged along the wall that were for formal meetings. "It's done," she said. "Almost," he said. "What's left?" "The formal proceeding, the territorial response, addressing the 7 outer packs who are in contact with Wynne, and doing it carefully enough that I don't drive them further away by making them feel they've been caught in something." He paused. "Months of careful work. But the proof is there." "Yes," he said, "the proof is there." He looked at his tea. "Lyra's name will be part of the proceeding. What was done to her, and why." She was quiet. "She'll be known," he said. "Not the way she deserved to be known. Not the way I would have chosen. But known." She looked at him. She thought about the 14 months of letters, the patient architecture of something that had been designed to bring down everything he was responsible for. She thought about what it must be like to see that architecture laid out and to understand its full scope. "What happened to you in the past 2 years?" she said. "The isolation. The not knowing where the problems were coming from. The losses." She stopped. "That was all engineered." "Most of it," he said. "Yes. And you held it together anyway." He looked at her, the expression he sometimes had, complicated and moving through several things. "Barely," he said, honest in the specific way he was always honest, without decoration. "Barely is enough," she said. "Barely is actually what matters. Anyone can hold together easy things." He was quiet for a moment. "I looked at your wrist that day in Ashford," he said, "and I looked away, because I didn't know what to do with what I felt." She held very still. "I was standing in a healer's house in a small settlement," he said, looking at a mark I had been told was impossible on a living person's skin, on the wrist of a woman I had never met, who had walked into a blizzard alone, and come out the other side with my son. He paused. What I felt was not a small thing. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, "What did you feel?" A long pause. Not hesitation. Organization. "Like something had been arranged," he said, "by something much older, and much more patient, than either of us, that knew what was needed before we did." She looked at her wrist. The mark sat quiet and warm. "The scholar says the seal extends," she said, "beyond Eli, toward the bloodline, toward the family. Owen told me he told you that," he said. "And?" A pause. "And I've been trying to decide whether to tell you that the extension began before I read Owen's account," he said, "before I understood the history of it. Whether to tell you that I noticed it happening, and did not have a framework for it, and found it." "Found it what?" she said. "Difficult," he said, "in the way that things are difficult when they matter." She held his gaze. She had told herself, many times in the past weeks, not to make more of things than they were. She had told herself that the mark was a bond with Eli, and that Kalion was adjacent to that bond, and that proximity and shared circumstances created warmth between people, without that warmth necessarily being anything more than what it was. She had told herself this, and she had believed it, and she had been, she thought now, telling herself something that was not false, but was also not quite the whole truth. "The mark doesn't invent things," she said. "Owen said it recognizes them." "Yes," he said. "So, whatever it's extending toward," she said, "would have to already be there." He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. The fire shifted. Outside the study window, the palace was dark and quiet. Eli was asleep in her rooms, and the guards were positioned, and the palace was safe in a way it had not been 3 weeks ago. She thought about 14 months of engineered losses, and a year of careful unraveling, and a night in a border forest in the snow. She thought about what was already there. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, not a declaration, a simple statement of fact. He looked at her. "I know," he said. And the way he said it was not relief and not certainty, but something that contained both, and lived somewhere between them where things were real. She finished her tea. She set the cup down. "Sleep," she said. "You know where to find me in the morning." She left. In the corridor, she stopped for a moment and looked at her wrist in the low light. The mark was warm. She went back to her rooms and she slept, properly, deeply, for the first time in weeks. The formal proceeding against Wynne began in the second week of the new month, and it was the largest formal event the council had convened in 7 years, which meant it was the largest it had convened since Caelian had become king. Fen came back from the north for it. Agnes managed the documentation. Owen Bright sat in the front row of the observers because he had verified the handwriting and his presence was required, and also because Sarah suspected he would not have missed it, regardless of whether his presence was required. The council chambers were full. Not just the 14 seats, now 12 with Hale and Neil absent, but observers, pack representatives, the legal staff, 2 people from the historical archives whose role Sarah did not entirely understand, but who seemed to feel it was important to be present. She was seated at the side again. The position she had occupied at the inquiry into her own seal, the position of someone presenting rather than voting. She had asked to be there, and Caelian had not objected, which she had taken to mean that he understood her reasons without needing them explained. The proceedings were formal and long, and she paid attention to every word of them. The documents Fen had brought were entered into the formal record. Agnes read the relevant sections aloud, which took 3 hours, because Agnes believed that the formal record required the formal reading, and that shortcutting the reading was shortcutting the seriousness, and Sarah found she agreed. The seriousness of what had been done required the seriousness of being fully heard. Wynne was not present. He had been formally summoned and had not come, which was itself entered into the record, and was, Agnes told her afterward, legally significant. The council reached its determination by early afternoon. The determination was what the documents required it to be, that Lord Gareth Wynne of the Northern Territories had engaged in deliberate conspiracy against the crown, against the safety of the royal heir, and against the life of a woman named Lyra, who was named formally in the record, her full name, and her pack of origin, and the fact of what had been done to her. Lyra of Coldwater Pack. Sarah heard the name in that room, in the formal voice of the council's recording secretary, and she held it. She thought about a woman she had never met, who had spent the last of herself getting her son to safety. She thought, "You're known now. You're in the record. Your son is alive, and your name is in the permanent record of this palace, and it will be there long after the people who wanted it erased are not." The determination was signed by 10 of the 12 present council members. The remaining 2 abstained, which was not the same as opposing, and was recorded as such, and which told her something about those 2 members that she filed for later. Caelian signed last, with the formal pen that was used for official acts, and the document became binding. Wynne's response came 2 days later, not through formal channels, and not as a peaceful submission. He sent a declaration through the Northern Pack Network, addressed to the 6 packs he had cultivated, and to anyone else in the territory who cared to read it, claiming that the proceeding was politically motivated, and that the evidence had been fabricated by a king who wished to consolidate power rather than share it. It was, Fen said, reading the declaration with the specific expression of someone who had expected exactly this, and found the actual version slightly less sophisticated than anticipated, exactly what Wynne would do. Caelian sent individual responses to each of the 6 packs. Not the same response, not a form letter. Individual responses, specific to what each pack's concern actually was, addressing their particular position, and history, and what they stood to gain from supporting Wynne, versus what they stood to lose, if the fabrication claim was tested against the actual documented evidence. He asked Sarah to read each one before he sent it, not to edit, to tell him whether the tone of each one was right. She read all 6. She made notes in the margins, small, specific, the places where the phrasing might land wrong with someone who already felt defensive. He read her notes and revised 4 of the 6. "You know more about how outsiders read internal palace documents than I do," he said. "I was an outsider for the first month I was here," she said. "You're not an outsider now," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said, "I'm not." 3 of the 6 packs responded within the week, cautiously, but responding, asking for the documentary evidence, and asking for direct meetings rather than network communication. That was progress. 2 packs did not respond. 1 pack sent back a very formal letter that was not hostile, but was carefully measured, which meant they were waiting to see how Wynne handled his situation before committing to either side. That was not progress, but it was not a closed door. The formal proceedings against Hale and Neil concluded in the same week that 3 more of Wynne's connections inside the palace were identified and quietly removed. Hale lost his council seat permanently. Neil was given the option to resign and took it, which Caelian allowed because Neil's connection to Wynne was thinner and his cooperation in the inquiry had been more forthcoming than Hale's. Hale left the palace on a Wednesday without speaking to anyone, which Fenn said was the specific kind of exit that meant someone understood they had lost, in a way that could not be recovered from. She thought Fenn was right. Caldwell and the compromised guard were dealt with through the formal legal processes, which were slower but correct. Hart, she learned from Colin, had left the territory entirely. He had gone west, beyond the territory's borders, to somewhere that extradition required its own proceedings. Caelian had begun those proceedings. He'll come back eventually, Colin said, or he won't. Either way, he's not in a position to do anything useful for Wynne from outside the territory. She thought about Hart's smile. She thought about the total absence of worry in it. She thought that whatever Hart had been confident about had not delivered what he had expected it to. She found she did not feel triumphant about this. She felt careful, the way she felt about everything that was not yet finished, because Hart was not caught, and Wynne was not surrendered, and the 7 packs were not all accounted for. But she felt the difference between this week and the week she had arrived, and that difference was the kind of substantial fact she could put weight on. On a Thursday, Owen Bright asked her to come to the library. She went, with Eli in her arms, because he was in his awake period, and she had learned that he was better carried than set down during the awake period. Owen was at his usual table, but this time, the books arranged in front of him were not about the seal. They were about the seal's history, specifically the secondary cases, the cases after Karis, of which there were, Owen said, looking at her over his glass lenses, 4 documented instances in 300 years. I want to tell you about the 4th one, he said. She sat down. She shifted Eli to her shoulder, where he could see over it, which he preferred. The 4th case was 60 years ago, Owen said. A woman named Petra Cole. He paused. Not a relation that we know of. Go on, she said. She found a royal child in circumstances similar to yours, Owen said. The child had been separated from the family during a crisis. She returned the child. The seal appeared. She came to the palace. He paused. She was an Omega. Sarah looked at him. Of the 4 cases, he said, 3 of the 4 bearers were Omega ranked. She sat with this. Is that in the records you showed me? She said. In this section, he said. He turned the book toward her. She read. The text was careful, the kind of careful that academic language used when it was being precise about something that had implications. The 4th case bearer had been Omega ranked, it said, and had arrived at the palace with all the social disadvantages that entailed, and had left the palace 50 years later as one of the most respected figures in the institutional memory of the royal house. She put her finger on that line. 50 years, she said. She outlived 3 kings, Owen said. She was guardian to the heir she found, and then to that heir's heir, and the seal transferred once, to her daughter, who served the following generation. Sarah looked at Eli on her shoulder. He was looking at the books with interest. The seal doesn't choose randomly, she said. No, Owen said. And it doesn't choose based on rank. Clearly not, he said. Of the 4 cases, 3 Omegas and 1 Beta. No Alphas. She thought about this. She thought about what it would mean to choose a guardian for something precious, something that needed protecting not through power, but through something that could not be bought or ranked or trained into a person. It chooses people who protect things, she said, without being asked and without needing to gain from it. Yes, Owen said. That is the most accurate summary I've encountered. She looked at the diagram in the margin of the book, the same shape as the one on her wrist. She thought, 300 years of this. 300 years of the seal, finding the right person, and that person arriving, and the thing that needed protecting surviving because of it. She thought about the night in the forest, the lantern, the snow, the sound that had not fit the trees. She thought, she had always been going to hear that sound. She had always been going to walk toward it. Some things were not decisions. They were the expression of what you already were. Thank you, Owen, she said. She stood up. She carried Eli out of the library and down the corridor and up the staircase that turned twice, past the window that showed the inner garden, past the door with the catch that needed lifting. She went to find Kalian. He was in the outer yard, in conversation with two people she recognized as envoys from one of the packs that had requested a direct meeting. He looked up when she came through the gate. He held her gaze for a second across the yard, that present, full attention look. She waited near the gate. When the conversation finished, he crossed to her. "Owen?" he said. "He showed me the fourth case," she said, "from 60 years ago." He looked at her. "She was there for 50 years, she said. He was quiet. "I want you to know that I know that," she said. "That I read it and I understand it, and I'm not." She paused. "I'm not looking for a way to interpret it as temporary." He held her gaze. "I know you're not," he said. "I've known that for a while." She looked at Eli, who was looking at the outer yard with his usual focused attention, already interested in the new space, already filing it. "He's going to be a handful," she said. "Yes," Kalian said, and something in his voice was warm in a way she felt rather than heard. She looked at him. He was looking at Eli, the unguarded expression, and then he looked at her, and the expression stayed. It was, she thought, the kind of look that said several things at once, things that were not quite ready to be said in words because words required a precision that the feeling had not yet agreed to, but that were entirely clear in the face of someone who had stopped being careful about showing them. She looked back. She let him see whatever he was going to see. The yard was cold, and the sky was gray, and Eli grabbed a fistful of her hair, with the cheerful lack of apology of someone who had decided hair was a reasonable thing to hold. She winced. Kalian reached over and gently extracted Eli's grip from her hair, with the practiced economy of someone who had been learning this particular skill over the past weeks. Their hands touched in the process. Neither of them commented on it. Neither of them moved away. She thought about Owen's fourth case-bearer, Petra Cole, who had arrived at a palace that did not expect her, carrying a child that needed her, and had stayed for 50 years, and been known for it long after she was gone. She thought, 50 years felt like a beginning. She went back to her rooms that evening, and sat with Eli in the chair by the fire, and thought about the word permanent. She had spent most of her life in situations that were not permanent. The Omega ranking meant that everything around her was negotiable, in a way that nothing around her was actually negotiated honestly. It just changed, shifted, was adjusted by other people's decisions that she was not party to. A job taken away, a resource moved, a relationship soured because her rank had become inconvenient. She had learned not to build things she could not carry. The seal had put her in a place she could not be moved from. Legally, in the ancient language of a protection that predated rank entirely, she was exactly where she was, and no decision of Hales or Niels, or anyone else who found her inconvenient, could change that. She had not understood, for the first weeks, how to feel about something that could not be undone. She was beginning to understand. Permanent, she thought, was not a trap. Permanent was a foundation. She had never had one before. Eli made his soft, settled sound against her neck. She thought about what he would be like in 5 years, in 10. She thought about the silver eyes becoming less infant-wide and more deliberate, about the small hands becoming less grabbing and more reaching, about the person who was going to grow out of this small weight against her chest. She thought about being there for all of it. She held him closer. She thought she was going to be there for all of it. She had decided. She was not sure exactly when she had decided, whether it was in the forest or in the healer's house or in the council room or in the yard today with Kalian's hand next to hers, but she had decided, and decisions that were true did not need a specific moment. They were simply the thing that became visible when you stopped pretending it was not already the case. She was going to be there for all of it. The fire burned low. She added wood. She thought about the mark on her wrist, not the legal fact of it, not the ancient history Owen had shown her, but the actual warmth of it, the way it sat in her skin, like something that had always been there, waiting to be visible. She thought about the night it appeared, the cold and the dark and the small fingers on her wrist, and she thought about what she had felt, not a burden, not a mystery, not an obligation, recognition, like the forest, the snow, the crying, the child, and the Mark had all known something before she did, and had simply been waiting for her to arrive at the same place. She had arrived. She was here. The palace was quiet outside her door, the particular quiet of a place at rest, fires burning low, guards steady at their positions, the collective warmth of a large household settled into the night. She had been in this palace for 2 months, and it had the particular texture of somewhere she knew, the sounds and smells and silences that belonged to it specifically, that she could distinguish from any other large building. Her home. She was, she thought, not finished being surprised by that word. She thought she might not be finished for a long time. Eli was asleep. She put him in his crib and stood over it for a moment, the way she had stood over it many times and many nights, looking at the absolute peace of his sleeping face, and thinking about all the things that had needed to go right for him to be here. She thought about Lyra. She said, quietly, in the dark room, "I've got him." The fire shifted. The warmth of it moved across the room. She went to her own bed, and she slept. In the morning, Kalian knocked on the door at an unremarkable hour with tea, as had become ordinary, and she opened the door and he came in, and they sat by the fire and talked while Eli was still asleep. They talked about the pack meetings, and the formal responses still pending, and a letter from the Eastern Territory that needed attention. And then they talked about less immediately pressing things, the kind of things that people talked about when the urgent had been handled enough to allow it, the small observations about the day, and the palace, and the world. He told her something Fen had said that had been funny, without intending to be. She told him about Owen's 4th case, and he listened with the full attention he brought to everything she said to him, and when she finished he said, 50 years is a long time. Yes, she said. It's also not enough, he said, with the careful understatement of a person saying something that is not small. She held his gaze. No, she said, it's not. From the crib came the sound of Eli waking up, the particular sequence of small sounds that meant he had arrived back into consciousness, and was now assessing the situation and finding it satisfactory. They both looked at him. He looked back at them with his silver eyes, and made his settled sound, the one that meant she was there, and then he extended one small arm in the direction of Kalian, which was new. Kalian looked at his son for a moment. Then he set down his tea, and went to the crib and picked him up. Eli went quiet in his arms, with the specific quiet of someone in the right place, and he turned his face against his father's shoulder, and the 3 of them were in the room together, with the fire burning and the pale winter morning coming through the window, and it was, Sarah thought, exactly what 50 years could begin to look like. She picked up her tea. She looked at her wrist. The mark was warm, and settled, and permanent, and hers. She was home. Spring came to the palace the way spring came to places that had earned it, slowly, and then all at once. The snow on the inner garden went from solid to patchy to gone, and the trees that had been bare-branched silhouettes for months grew buds that opened in the space of a week, small tight things that became leaves before she had fully registered the change. The grounds opened up. The light shifted. The whole weight of the palace's winter season lifted in a way she had not anticipated, because she had not been there for a winter before, and had not known how much weight it carried until it left. Eli was 5 months old, and a different creature entirely from the 8-week infant she had found in the snow. He was not a different person. She was certain of that, had been certain of it since the first week, that the silver-eyed focus, and the specific quality of his attention, and the way he settled when she held him, had been consistent from the beginning, and were consistent now, only larger, more expressive, more arrived at. He was sitting up now, with assistance, and looking at everything in the world, with the particular seriousness of someone who had decided to understand all of it, and was working through the project methodically. He recognized Sarah first and most completely, which the seal's history had made inevitable, and which she would have found true regardless of the history. He recognized Kalian, with a quality she found difficult to describe, a warmth that was also a kind of reaching, something that pulled them together whenever they were in the same room. He recognized Fen with the particular amusement that Fen generated in most people when Fen was being himself, which was frequently. He recognized Helene and Bryn and Colin and Owen. He had started to be interested in other children. The palace staff's families included several, and on the mornings when they were in the inner garden, he would track the moving ones with the total focus of someone identifying a category and wanting to study its examples. Fen said he was already doing reconnaissance. Sarah thought Fen was not entirely wrong. The formal response to Wynne arrived in the third week of spring, not from Wynne himself, but from his territory's formal council, which suggested that even his inner circle had recognized that whatever he had been planning was no longer viable. The response acknowledged the proceedings' findings without fully conceding them, which was the diplomatic equivalent of a man sitting down in the middle of an argument because his legs had given out while insisting he had chosen to sit. Kalian drafted his response to it over 2 days. He showed it to Sarah before he sent it. She read it. She made one note, in the margin of the third paragraph, about a phrase that sounded colder than the rest, and would read as a deliberate cut, rather than a statement of fact, which was accurate, but would keep Wynne's counsel in a defensive posture, when a path toward something functional was more useful. He read the note. He revised the phrase. The response went out. Colin said, afterward, that the phrase change would probably matter more in 6 months than anything else in the letter. She thought he was right. The 5 outer packs who had been in Wynne's circle were in varying stages of reconsideration. 2 had sent formal communications aligning with the Crown. 1 was in direct negotiation. 2 remained quiet, which meant they were watching. Kalian was patient about the quiet ones, in a way that she thought he had not always been able to be, and was now, and she thought she understood what had changed. Not that the situation was easier, not that the patience cost him less, but that he was not doing it alone, and that fact made the sustained effort different in some quality she recognized from her own experience, the specific way that presence changed endurance. She had told him as much, once, sideways, not as a declaration but as an observation, and he had looked at her for a long moment and said, yes, and then had not elaborated, because he did not always elaborate, and that was, she was learning, part of how he meant things deeply. Hale was gone from the palace, and, as far as any of them could tell, from any position of meaningful influence. The inquiry's determination had been binding, and its dissemination through the pack network had been careful and thorough. Owen had drafted the historical summary himself, which meant it was precise, and would remain in the formal record for as long as there was a formal record. The council was smaller now, but the members who remained were, Agnes told her, more aligned with actual governance, and less with the kind of maneuvering that had consumed the council's energy for the past 2 years. This is what it was supposed to be, Agnes said, one afternoon in the library where Sarah had begun meeting her regularly on the legal history of the territory. Before. What changed it? Sarah asked. Agnes looked at her for a moment. People who were more interested in advantage than in what they were supposed to be doing, she said. That's always what changes it. The positions attract the wrong kind of person, and then it takes something significant to reorient. Significant happened, Sarah said. Yes, Agnes said, it did. The formal ceremony for the council's reconstitution was scheduled for late spring. Kalian asked Sarah to be present not as an observer, but as a recognized member of the royal household, which was a designation that Agnes had confirmed was appropriate under the old law, and that Helene had confirmed was appropriate under the current household protocols, and that Fen had confirmed was appropriate under common sense. She would be introduced formally, for the first time, not as the seal-bearer, or as the child's guardian, or as the Omega from Ashford, who had been brought to the palace under unusual circumstances. She would be introduced by her name, and by her role, which was what she was, not what she had come from, or what the old rank system had assigned her. She thought about this for several days, not with anxiety, with a kind of careful satisfaction that she was still not entirely used to feeling, the specific feeling of things being called by their right names. Fen found her in the garden on the day she was thinking about this most directly, with Eli on her knee, and the spring sun doing actual work for the first time in months. He sat beside her on the bench with the familiarity of someone who had made this garden his own practice space for thinking. Nervous? He said. No, she said. He looked at her. Genuinely no, she said. I was nervous the first morning in the council room, when they were examining the mark. I'm not nervous now. What changed? He said. She thought about it. I know the room, she said. I know the people in it. I know what I'm there for, and I'm not confused about whether I deserve to be there. You were never confused about that, Fen said. I was, she said, briefly, at the beginning. He looked at Eli, who was currently attempting to eat a small flower that had not done anything to deserve this. He's going to be a lot, Fen said, with genuine fondness. He already is, she said. She removed the flower from Eli's grasp. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone who felt that this was an unreasonable intervention. She looked back with the expression of someone who was entirely comfortable being unreasonable about flower eating. He turned his attention to her marked wrist instead, as he so often did. You know, Fen said, I've known Kalian since he was 6 years old. I've seen him in difficult circumstances, good ones, complicated ones, situations where the right thing was obvious, and situations where nothing was obvious. I know his face very well. She kept her eyes on Eli. And, she said, and his face has been different since you came, Fen said. Not happy exactly. Not easy, but present in a way it hasn't been in a long time, like someone turned a light back on in a room that had been dark. She did not respond for a moment. He told me, she said, carefully, that what he felt when he looked at my wrist was not a small thing. No, Fen said. It wasn't. I know, she said. He was quiet. I'm also not making a decision based on the seal, she said. I know what the seal does. I know the history. I'm not going to let the history be the reason. What's the reason? He said. She thought about it. She thought about the tea in the corridor, the sitting on the floor, the flat honest words about Lyra, the window light burning late, the hand extracting Eli's grip from her hair, the 2 cups, always 2 cups. He's a good man, she said, who has been in a very bad situation for a long time, and who has held it together by deciding every day to hold it together, and who doesn't perform that effort or ask for recognition of it. That's the reason. Fen was quiet for a moment. That's a good reason, he said. She nodded. Eli had located a new object of interest, a beetle, moving along the bench, and was leaning toward it, with the intensity of a professional. She steadied him. Tell him, Fen said. I will, she said, when it's time. When is it time? She looked at him. He looked back with the pale, easy eyes that she had learned, over months, were not as easy as they appeared. When I've decided, she said. Not when you've decided, Fen. He raised his hands. Fair enough. She smiled, which was not something she had done easily for most of her life, and which she was finding came more naturally now, in a way she was still slightly surprised by. The ceremony was 3 days away. She thought about standing in the council chamber and being introduced by her name and her role. She thought about the room she knew, and the people in it she trusted, and the ones she had not yet figured out, and the ones she had already filed as people she would need to watch. She thought about Kalian, who would be at the head of the table, and who would look at her when she entered, and whose look she could now read with a precision that she thought would take other people years to develop, and which had developed in her in months, because she had paid attention to him the way she paid attention to everything, completely. She thought about what she was going to say to him, at some point, in some quiet moment with tea and the fire and Eli nearby. She had thought about the words for a while, and had not found the right ones. But she was not worried about this, because she was good at finding the right words when the moment actually arrived. She had always been better at saying true things in real time than at rehearsing them. She would know when it was time. She would say it. The spring sun moved across the garden, and the beetle moved across the bench, and Eli watched it with his whole self. She held him. She thought about the forest, the snow, the cold, the lantern making its small orange circle in the dark. She thought about the sound. She thought about the walk toward it. She thought, if she had known, that night, what the walk was going to lead her to, all of it, the palace, and the politics, and the danger, and the long, patient work of building something that would hold. If she had known, would she have walked? She would have run. She would have run toward it. She had always run toward the crying. She looked at Eli, who had lost interest in the beetle, and was now looking at her, with his silver eyes, in the way he had looked at her from the very first moment. That particular focus, that recognition that had arrived before she understood what was being recognized. She thought she understood it now. She had found him in the snow. The seal had found her. Kalian had found the proof. Owen had found the history. Fen had found the thread north. Lyra had found the way out. Everyone who needed to find something had found it. She was home. She was not going anywhere. She picked Eli up from her knee and held him against her shoulder and felt the small, warm weight of him and the warmth of the mark and the warmth of the spring sun, and she thought, this is what 50 years begins to look like. She thought it was more than enough to start. The day of the ceremony arrived with the specific quality of spring days that had decided to be generous, warm, clear, the kind of light that made everything look like it had been cleaned overnight. Sarah dressed without fuss. She had been given clothes appropriate to the occasion, well made and plain, nothing that shouted its cost, and she had put them on and looked at herself in the mirror for exactly long enough to confirm that she looked like herself, which was what she needed to look like. She checked on Eli first. He was with Bryn, who was going to bring him to the ceremony after the formal opening, because he was 5 months old and had strong opinions about being left in rooms while things happened without him. He was in his alert period, bright-eyed and focused on everything Bryn showed him with the thoroughness he brought to educational opportunities. She kissed the top of his head. He grabbed her wrist. She left him with Bryn and went downstairs. Colin was in the corridor, which was not exactly unusual but suggested he had positioned himself there with purpose. He looked at her once, the assessing look of someone checking whether the person they are responsible for is ready, and then he nodded. "Kalian wants a word before we go in," he said. She followed him to the small room off the main corridor that Kalian sometimes used before formal events, the one with the window that looked onto the inner garden. He was there, and he was dressed for the ceremony, and he looked the way he always looked in formal dress, composed and correct, and also slightly as though the formality was a coating over something more immediate. He looked at her. She looked back. He said, "I know this isn't what you came here expecting." "I didn't come here expecting anything," she said. "I came here because you told me to." Something moved through his expression. "You came because Eli needed you to," he said. "Yes," she said, "that too." He was quiet for a moment, standing at the window, the garden beyond it green and new in the spring light. "Today, when you're introduced," he said, "I want you to know that the words they use are not political language. They're not," he paused. "They're not the minimum required by the law. I reviewed them myself." She looked at him. "What are the words?" she said. He told her. She held them in her mind for a moment. They were formal, as the ceremony required, but they were not minimal. They were the words of someone who had thought about what they were saying and had said the most true version of it, rather than the most careful. She said, "You wrote those." "Yes," he said. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him, close enough that the formality of the occasion had to work hard to keep its distance, and she looked at him steadily. "I was going to wait," she said, "until after the ceremony, until a quiet moment. I had a plan for it." He looked at her. "I'm not going to wait," she said. She said what she had been holding since the yard in winter, since the study and the tea, and the documented letters, and the words about feeling not a small thing. She said it plainly, because she was a plain-speaking person, and she had learned that plainness was the most honest way she knew to handle something she meant. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Not the organizing silence, not the processing silence. Something else. The silence of someone who had been waiting for something, and was now in the moment of it arriving. "I've been trying," he said, very carefully, "to determine when it would be appropriate to say the same thing." "It would be appropriate now," she said. He said it. She had thought she knew what it would sound like, and she had been right about the words, and wrong about everything else, about the way he said them, which was the careful, undramatic way he said things he meant completely, the way that asked for nothing except to be received. She received it. Outside the window, the garden was green, and the light was good, and somewhere in the palace, Eli was being carried toward the ceremony by Bryn, with his silver eyes open and his attention forward. She thought, 3 months. She thought, it had been 3 months since the night in the forest, and the crying, and the cold hand on her wrist. She thought that 3 months was both no time at all and a very long time, and that both things could be true simultaneously. "We should go in," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not move immediately. Neither did she. Then Colin knocked on the door, once, which meant what it always meant. and they looked at each other, and she almost smiled, and the ghost of the thing that sat next to amusement moved through his face. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They went in. The council chamber was full, and it was bright with spring light from the high windows, and the people in it turned when the doors opened, and she walked in with her back straight, and her wrist visible, and her name her own. Calian took his seat. She took hers. And when Agnes stood to open the ceremony and read the formal words that had been prepared, the words Calian had written, Sarah sat in the chair at the formal table, not the side position, not the observer's position, the table itself. And she listened to her name, and her role said clearly in a room full of people, and she thought about 30 years of rooms that had named her by her rank, rather than by what she was. This room named her by what she was. She looked at her wrist. The mark was warm and permanent and settled. Eli arrived with Bryn halfway through the ceremony, because Eli had opinions about waiting, and the small sound he made when he came through the door and found her in the room was the sound she knew better than any other, the soft, settled sound that meant she was there, that meant he had found her, that meant the world was arranged the way it was supposed to be arranged. The council chamber held it. The spring light held it. She held it. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, in a room that knew her name, in a palace that was hers, in a life that was finally, fully, without reservation or apology, her own. She had walked toward the crying. She had always walked toward the crying. She would keep walking.